And we're live. Okay, cool. Okay. So, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Alrighty. So my name is Sin. I also stream here on Twitch under Sin Fatalis. I met Rex73 just randomly surfing through streams on Twitch here, and I enjoyed the topics that she and her friends were discussing, and I stuck around. And thankfully, she invited me here to discuss whatever we are going to be discussing today or
Yeah.
tonight.
Sid is very cool. He dropped in on my first ever stream, I think, and was my first ever follower. So, very cool. Very much appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
Got my ball rolling. I think after like the first stream, I was like debating whether I wanted to keep doing it, but then after I got like the first follower, and I'm like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, and you've built a decent following so far, and with any luck, it only continues to go up.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. This is something I'm actually really passionate about. It's why I got into streaming. It was like never really about like gaining followers or anything, but like I followed the Twitch side of politics or like Twitch politics a lot, and I kept seeing like all these people like it's really mean to say, but like there's a lot of stupid people where I kept seeing people like say just like dumb shit all the time, and I'm like, dude, how are you on like the politics side of Twitch, and you're just saying like the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. And I'm like, there's like a gap that needs to be filled. Like, there's a few Twitch politics people that I really like who are really smart and like go about debating in a really good way and like are usually pretty good faith and will argue like, I think this, but I can understand the other side. But then a lot of people who are just like really bipartisan, like, oh, it's my way or the highway. And I'm like, there's like a gap that needs to be filled of like people who can argue both sides, I think. That's kind of where I want to like fill in. And I was like, oh, maybe I could do that.
Yeah, and I think that's important. You do have to know both sides of the argument to really understand the position. Because me personally, I think that there's some sort of synthesis to take away from opposing views, uh, and that's kind of how you deduce a little bit of the morality and the principles about a person, and kind of see how the method of reasoning works. Like the reasoning is a really important part of discussion for me. I'm not so much looking to say like, "Hey, you're wrong."
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually just looking to like put questions to like, so if you mean like this means something, if it shares something in common with something else, are they the same? It's like a very Socratic
Yeah.
approach, and it's never about, hey, you're wrong. It's
It's
like
like a
maybe
meta
it's not
discussion.
exactly, yeah, it's not exactly what you might have thought it was, but
Mm-hmm.
let's see if we can get to the answer together.
Yeah, I like that approach, and I think like a lot of people like I don't know, maybe if like social media's exasperated it, but it feels like people are super divulged into like if they can even see the other side, they start to feel like a bad person because they're like, "Oh, I'm sympathizing with the other side or I understand their point." And people think that's a bad thing now. Like and I think that's like the issue with like when I talk to so many people, it's like, "Well, I don't understand why they think that way." And it's like, "Well, maybe you should. If you're going to like argue a position, you need to understand the other side to like know like how are you taking a side in something if you don't even understand the other side of the argument?"
Yeah, and I think that also plays into a lot of personal growth too, because
Mhm.
if you don't even make the attempt to understand the opposing view or even to question your own views, I don't think that as a person, as a nondescript person, that you would grow. Like if you're the same person from beginning all the way to the end of your life, assuming that you live a long and healthy life, then what was the purpose of your life if you never changed?
True. Yeah. I think that's like another thing for me personally. Like I have a family who's super politically diverse, so I grew up like being probably a little bit more conservative, not super conservative, but my dad was pretty conservative, my mom was pretty middle of the road. So like I got a lot of my ideas like from my dad. And then as I started to get older, it was like this idea of like challenging my own beliefs, like when I saw new information, and I was like I think I was always like very intuitive about that type of stuff. Like I was always a very curious kid, so it's like when I started to see other positions, I was like, "Oh, I didn't know you could think like that." And then I like really got into like challenge my own beliefs. And I swung like super left in high school, like just like extreme leftist in high school. And then as I got into university, I started to like come back from that, where I started to like now challenge these beliefs that I held in high school, and start to like fall back towards like the center. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar upbringing. My first introduction to morality comes from a religious background. I was
Okay.
between both sides of my family. My mother's side was Catholic, is primarily Catholic. My father's side, primarily Protestant, Lutheran.
Oh,
But
so
the
you're like
main
devout.
core, yeah, the main core of the arguments with though is because I said so, or because this book said so, and
Mm-hmm.
not just the Bible, but anything that had some sort of tenet or moral principle was because it said so. And as a very inquisitive child, which got me a lot of punishment,
Oh yeah.
I would ask why, and then it would just come back to that circular reasoning
Mm-hmm.
of because it said so or because I said so. And that's where I learned about like logical fallacies. It's like, okay, this is what's called circular reasoning,
Yeah.
because that's the only part of the argument. Well, X plus B equals C because C is because X said so.
Yeah. Do you think that's like a lot of the, like you said earlier that I think before we got on stream that you did a minor in philosophy. Do you think like that like upbringing of like not being able to challenge beliefs and not being able to have those conversations like kind of pushed you in that direction to like want to pursue like philosophy and like that deep questioning?
Well, thankfully for me, my parents never like they when I was young, they did take me to church a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But it was never something that as I got older, it was like you better go to church or you will go to hell. Like
Yeah.
there was always the religious belief that like hell exists. Don't be a bad person because if when you die, you will go to hell. So there's always that kind of like doing bad things leads to punishment. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's like one of the core tenets of where we get morality from is be a good person, get good things, be a bad person, get bad things. So we look at it
Yeah.
as like kind of we look at it as a means to an end. It's never be good for the sake of being good because being good in itself is worth pursuing. It's
Mm-hmm.
be good because you'll get good things,
Yeah.
which of course for those who don't know is the basic tenets of what would be utilitarian philosophy is you want to maximize like happiness and
Mm-hmm.
satisfaction and minimize suffering and punishment. But as I got into like my teens, and one of the things that I was really lucky is that my mother encouraged me to read, so I actually got into like a Greek, like the Greek mythic figures. I got into the Golden Fleece, and that got me into like Greek thinking, which of
Mm-hmm.
course encompasses philosophy and blah blah blah. And that's where I learned about like the historical Greek philosophical figures. And then as I got like into my teens, I started exploring those questions, reading their works, not understanding them.
Mm-hmm.
But they did put questions to me that I was like, hey, like I kind of think like this, and maybe we don't know everything about our existence as we thought we did.
Yeah. No, that's cool because maybe it's just a Greek myth kid thing. Like anyone who got into Greek myth as a kid now it turned out like this. No, that's good because I think for at least religious people I talk to, it can be a lot harder to get out of that thinking. So it's interesting that you, as like someone with like two pretty, I guess, devout sects of like Christianity or Catholicism. I know they're not the same thing, but like they're both sects of the same religion, right? Like Catholicism, Christianity.
So yes, Christianity is from what I understand, and I'm not like I don't have a degree in theology. I've
Mm-hmm.
never been a pastor or a priest or anything of the sort. So, but from my rudimentary understandings, that Christianity is the religion. It is the big umbrella
Yeah.
from which all other forms of the different types of Christian religions are derived from.
Yeah. Okay.
And when you're raised in the primarily Catholic faith, though, it's the Catholic faith from what it puts out there is what it states is that it is it is the true Christian religion, and that all others are simply imitations. Let's see, and it looks like you have a comment there, so I'll let you
Oh,
get to it.
that's my friend Michelle. I can say as someone who goes out of their way to do nice things, it's a combo of self gratification as well as wanting to help others. So yeah, I think that's like a for you. I think it's like probably more of like there is like some level of like just wanting to be a good person, but I think that's a rare thing to come across. I think most of us like in some level like at least for me, I do consider myself a utilitarian, So like I will do good things by society because I know like doing good to society will usually come back and do good to me, right? Like the good for society is usually the good for the self, right? And so like if I do bad things to the society, like if I steal, well now I might end up in jail, right? And so like cuz society will punish me for bad things, but like I'll do good things and like, you know, help out my neighbor because maybe I'll need it in like a couple months and like they'll be nice to me then for however long, right? So, but I think it's like really hard to come across people who might just do good things out of the goodness of their heart, which I won't comment on Michelle's personal life too much.
I do agree with that. It took me a lot of years and a lot of study and and education. Like
Mm-hmm.
I went through the formal education. I went to community college for 2 years, transferred to a 4 year university afterwards, finished my degree, and pursued philosophy as a minor the whole time. My major was sociology, and emphasized on social theory and social thought. I've always had, from an academic standpoint, once I was able to gain the interest, a very societal interest in like
Mm-hmm.
what's best for society.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not like when I was younger, I certainly did do like if I did something good, it was because I was expecting that, someone would do something nice for me in return. I
Mm-hmm.
would get something good in return or a reward. And if I did something bad, well, I'm going to be punished and I'd rather not be punished, so I shouldn't do bad things or at least not get caught doing bad things, right?
Exactly. Do you feel like you're still like that? Like, do you still, to some extent, like, do good by society because you know it's good for society, or is like, do you think like, do you feel good just being a good person?
Well, there's another thing that you touched down on too, is that like when you do good things, it does feel good. And one anecdote I have is like we just had the holiday season happen, and my friends all have young kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're all like family to me, nieces and nephews. So I was able to give to the kids like presents and stuff that they wanted, and to see them like really happy to receive things. Like it made me feel good to give them things. But part of that was also like the understanding like I was doing good things for them because doing goodness for their sake, like as its own good,
Mm-hmm.
as a higher value would have, it's like it's just a good thing for them to have. But that lesson, and I don't know how they think entirely. Like I really need to sit down with them and like ask them these questions, but it's good for them to be introduced to the concept of like good for goodness sake, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's even in one of like the Christmas rhymes,
Christmas.
like be
Yeah.
good for
Christmas.
goodness sake. And
Yeah.
that's a really profound thing that's just kind of
Yeah.
snuck in there. And then you're like, I'm good for presents actually.
Yeah. Exactly. We all just good because we want Santa to come.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I wonder, and maybe I'm just a talking to you and Michelle now. All of a sudden, I'm like, maybe I'm just a bad person because like I think I'm a like I'll be a like a decent person for like most of my interactions. I don't know if I'm like a necessarily well, I don't know because I try to like donate where I can and like my family usually donates to like animal shelters and food shelters at Christmas just because it's like these are places that like are good for communities and stuff like that. Like we know a lot of people who like use the food shelter. Our food shelter programs are pretty good. Same with our SPCA and stuff. Like we'll donate, but like other than that, I'm like I don't know how much I go out of my way to be like but maybe I just don't see myself that way, and maybe I'm better than I think I am. But I don't know how much I go out of my way to be like a really nice person or like good for goodness sake, as you say. Whereas like I usually do things in the sense that like, oh, this is either going to be good to me later on. Like if I'm like nice at work and stuff, then it usually means that like people at work will like me, they'll respect me more, I'll get a raise, like all those type of things. Or, but I don't know how much other than like and again, even with family, it's like you're nice to your family because these are the people who are going to love and care about you or like raised you well and like gave you a roof over your head and stuff. But like how much I wonder how much of the stuff we actually do like intrinsically is good out of goodness sake. Like even with your niece and nephew, like that's your like there is some level of like you're doing it because you love your nieces and nephew and it's like I'm being good to them because like I want to be good to them, but also like they're your family, they're going to take care of you, like these are people you can rely on. You want to be a good influence on them because you want them to be better for society, like being a good influence on them will have good outcomes for them as well. I think a lot of people are good because their goodness is transactional. Yeah, that's how it feels sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that's the most root, like the idea, like, because when you talk about like good and bad or like good and evil, those topics of morality, when you start discussing them and examining them philosophically, you find that they're way more complex than they are at first glance. Like it seems super simple at first. It's like do good, get good things; do bad, bad things happen to you. But there's a whole examination that goes into like the subjectivity and the objectivity. But like I'm not one to say like utilitarianism is good or bad in itself, but
Yeah.
I do examine that topic in such a way that it's like imagine how many people would actually be worse people if doing good things wasn't a transactional process. Like if you did
Yeah.
good things and terrible things happen to you. Most like you
I don't.
can do good and terrible things can happen to you, but most of the time it's good and you get good
Yeah.
things.
No, for sure. This is a. I don't know why. I don't know if you know how much you know about the Bible. Don't ask me why. I was a very like I didn't grow up religious at all. Like, so my family is like technically Sikh, but like none of my families like are very practicing. Other than like I have one or two grandparents that are. But I like learned about Sikhism growing up. But I also then like got interested in all religions, so I read a lot of the Bible. But there's that idea. I forget which story, what it's called. However, there's like one story where God basically makes a bet with the devil, saying like, I can put my most devout follower through hell and he'll still follow me, right? And like this devout follower does all the good things for God, praises him, like prays to him and all this type of stuff. However, God turns around and then punishes him and keeps giving him like, kills off his farms and like, all his plants die and all this type of stuff and bad things keep happening to him. And yet he still follows. And it's like, I don't know if most people would be like that, where if like they kept doing good things and then bad things started happening, if they would continue. Like, I know it's not like a one-to-one, but like, like you get the gist of like what I'm trying to say, where like people have that many bad things happen. I don't know if they'd continue to be a good person or like continue to do good things out of their kindness of their heart because they're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah, and that's the story that you're referring to is from the book of Job, and
Yes.
Job loses everything, even his family. Like God takes his family away from him, and in the end, still remains devout. And that's basically the question that that what we know is the Old Testament, and that's in the Talmud. I think that's the Hebrew book of faith.
Yep.
Is that they're basically putting that question to you? Is that do you still follow the Almighty, even if these things still happen to you? And then that's acknowledging like those people who are truly devout and continue on for that, for like God's sake and following God's word and law, is that they're acknowledging that even if terrible things happen to me, there's still this higher thing that I should adhere to,
Yeah.
regardless of whether or not I'm rewarded in the end, because this thing is supreme above all. That's a very important question that they put in those ancient times that we're still examining today.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a question you ever can answer because I don't think we'll ever have like answers on like the trueness of God, obviously. Like I'm personally atheist or agnostic because I don't know if there is, but I also don't necessarily think it matters. Because if the God of like a Bible or like any like religion exists, I don't think he exists in the way that our books would say he exists. So I don't think it matters whether God is real or not.
Well,
And then
that's one of the things that I believe is inherently flawed with the multitude views of faith. And I'm not saying that faith and religion are bad. I don't think that at all. But I think that when we interpret what is divine and what we don't entirely understand, and we never could, because like the idea is that God is perfect and created imperfect beings, and therefore as imperfect beings we can never fully understand or create something that is perfect. It's not within our capacity. No matter, even if we had an eternity to try, we will still fail because it's outside of our wheelhouse. It's outside of our ability to do so.
hello, X
But
Stevie.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just hi, first time chatter.
Oh, first time chatter. I'm
Hello.
glad they're here.
Anyway, yeah,
Um,
sorry, you were saying.
but where were we at here before I got? So I was talking about just the so yeah, that's one of the thing that I was getting to is that we all have these different human thought interpretations of like what God wants us to do, right? And that puts us in conflict with other peoples of the world who say, no, God told us this is how we live, and you live wrong, and that's like being raised primarily Catholic. Like the original tenet is that like it is the true religion, it's the one religion, it's Catholic literally means universal. And then one of the questions that I had personally growing up, I was like, well, if it's universal, then why is it like how can it contradict itself? Because it says you can't do this, you can't do that. It doesn't appeal to all people.
Yeah.
And it's like if God wanted to exist universally, then why are we always in conflict with each other over the things that people, and every religion has the tenet and the belief that theirs is the true word, theirs is the true God. And why are we fighting each other and killing each other over these things? Like if God is supposed to exist for everybody equally, then why is it so skewed in favor of the few versus the many?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, that kind of dives into the question a little bit of like that if God is all powerful, then is he all good? And if he's all good, is he all powerful? It's like kind of a similar question of like if he's so universal, why do not all people follow him? Like you would think that he would be able to make all of his creations in a way that would like want to like follow him, but we don't, right? And so it's like it's one of those things of like if God is this like all powerful being who creates us like in his like because I know like the whole thing is like God, like at least for Christianity it's like and probably Catholicism too I would assume is like we're made in God's image. So if like we were made in God's image, would we not then follow God out of that principle?
yeah, and that's oh, and let's see here, and let's see what is that? I, oh, Emily, is
Oh,
that what
that's
it is?
Michelle. Yeah,
Yes, okay.
that's the one I know.
Um, oh, so let's see. The general teachings of Buddhism is that there is no God and you try to be your best. Yeah, so that was one of the things too. So Buddhism is interesting, and this is kind of going off topic, is that like from what I understand about Buddha, I've never practiced, but I have read the works of the Buddha, is that the Buddha never wanted to be God, but instead became deified over time. And I could be
Yeah,
completely mistaken,
no,
so I
you're
don't mean
correct on
to
that one.
insult her. I don't mean to insult or offend everybody, but as humans, like we tend to ritualize and deify figures. I mean, even imperial figures get deified. Like you look at ancient Rome, like men became gods. But if there was some sort of universality to it, it seems like it would be something that we just kind of understand. And I think that we kind of get like the core tenets of like goodness and badness, and those are messages that are you can find universally. But I think that our own human interpretation and our need for control, right? Like we shape the environment in our image so we feel like godlike because we can do that. Other things really can't. Insects can.
Yeah,
They manipulate their environment, but they're more hive minded. We're a collective, but we're individually minded. And then we start saying we start interpreting and perverting things that are divinely inspired with our own failed human ways of trying to like, well, now we've got a lot of people believing in this, and how do we keep that hold? And it should never be of the need for control. It should just be something that just kind of people fall into, in my own uneducated opinion.
yeah. I mean, I kind of get where you're coming from because I think it's kind of that idea of like we like people who are religious will use God to justify anything, and so like when you say like not like pervert, but like when we like I guess it's kind of a like God of the gaps thing, but like you were saying like people will like take something so divine and like make it very humanistic almost in the sense that like we'll see things like we won't manipulate our environment, but we see like the environment almost built for humans. We're like, oh, the environment adapted to humans, that means there must be a god. But we also like people won't turn around and think that like humans evolved and adapted to the environment to the point that we can live in it, but instead we'll like turn it the other way and say like God made the environment for us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the basic tenet of the Talmud, and that's what would be in the Christian faith as the Old Testament, is that you know man and humanity, which is been misunderstood as man as in the male of the species, has dominion. This was created
Yeah.
specifically for humanity, and more so for men to have like Adam in the story of creation named every creature on earth. And that's so from a religious standpoint, heck yeah, God created this place for us. This is ours to shape because it was given to us to have dominion over. It was
Yeah.
and that tends to be, that's also like something that gets debated now, is like people are like dominion, like domain, or did we have stewardship? And you can look at like the way that there are conflicts in dominion, like how our industrial life pollutes the world, like everything that we've
Someone really likes your voice.
sorry, talking to Optimus Prime. No, but I wish. I would probably need to smoke more cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes, but I'd probably need to start smoking them to actually sound like him. But I appreciate the
You're getting
compliment.
close.
But then there's people who are of the belief that we are actually the stewards. Like we are the caregivers. We are the watchers of this world, and we're supposed to facilitate this world's success. But that would go against us, like having the modern conveniences of technology, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going off in a tangent, so
Oh yeah.
go ahead.
People are enjoying listening to you talk though, apparently. Oh my god, now I got distracted by the chat because it was funny. Yeah, but it's this idea of like I think it's hard to like facilitate those two ideas too, because it's like either we have dominion over the space and that we were given to like create, but then other people want to say like God controls everything, like everything is destined, like I think it's really hard to determine like what's moral and ethical in religion when people have such, even within a religion, have such different views of like what God intended. So like there are people who believe like this is our dominion, our domain, like we're supposed to make of what this world, make of this world what it is, like make it ours, and it's like the human domain. However, there's other people who think everything's like that determinism kind of perspective where they think everything is predetermined by God, like God will take care of everything, like you're on the right path. Like so like it's really hard when you have like two different, like vastly different viewpoints that you're trying to reconcile. So it becomes really hard to like start to like even like try to like engage in those conversations, because you never know which conversation you're engaging with, because depending on who you're talking to, the topic of like whether God creates all and controls all is going to be like a really big determining factor on how you engage in like a conversation of like moral and ethics and what you're supposed to do and like how we approach the world, depending on like, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And yeah. And it does have a lot of influence too, because I mean we even have personality types and kinks where people are like, oh, I'm totally dumb, I'm totally alpha, or people are like, yeah, I'm okay with totally being like, I like being a sub, I like people telling me what to do, and that like they're the idea of morality and not just religion but just methods of control. Like you need people who are like, hey, like, yeah, daddy or mommy, tell me what to do, like I'm just here to like listen and do as I'm told. And like you need people who will just like who will follow rules and laws and belief. But like there are those who, like with the book of Job, is like there's a big question there. It's like, did Job follow the tenets of his own faith because of a knowledge that this faith and this belief and these edicts were because this is something that's good in itself and a philosophical question like that needs to be adhered to, something that's divine? Or was it just blind? Was it just completely blind? And if it's completely blind, then is that really any different from ignorance? Like and that's not something I think that is necessarily good in itself.
I think that's like kind of my, and I know you took a stance of saying like I don't have any problem with religion. I personally, I don't hate religion as a concept, but I think the idea of organized religion over the years has come to bother me more and more, especially under like super like monotheistic religions. And I could go into a whole topic about that, but I think this like, especially our like major three, like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, which like, you know, cover like a lot of our bases, especially in the Western world. It's this idea of like blind faith, and people will never question the beliefs or the beliefs they hold because they're like, well, I know this is good because God said it's good. But it's like, okay, but if God isn't good, is what you're doing still good, right? And I think that's the question people need to ask themselves is like, is what I'm doing good whether God existed or not? And I think that's like my worry is like when people like don't question that to that level of saying like, yeah, this is God. Like you can say it like it's good because God said it's good. But if you're wrong, are you still doing good by the people around you, right? And yeah, and that's my thing with, I don't like the indoctrination piece of religion of saying like, oh, these things are just good because my God says they're good. Well, but what if you're wrong? Because
Yeah,
if I'm,
and then it
yeah,
comes and then it comes back to that circular reasoning that it's like, well, the highest authority clearly is the divine and the creator. So
mm-hmm,
how dare you question that authority
yeah,
because it knows everything, and if it says this about that, then it must be fact and you can't refute it.
mm-hmm. Do not have the parent kink. Religions are acceptable cult socially. Oh, she stole my quote. I used to say that in high school all the time. I was like, religions are just socially acceptable cults.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily like there are people and leaders who do have cultish, and it's not just religion too. We have
Mm-hmm.
cults of
Oh, for
personality
sure, of course.
that are perversions that come through with celebrity, that
Mm,
come through
mm-hmm.
with politics. Like it's in all facets of life. I mean, um, there are many people out there who believe in homeopathic ways of treating cancer and illnesses because their favorite celebrity
Yeah,
says, "Oh, I did this one thing and it worked for me. Clearly, this is the cure for X." And then people are like, "Oh, well, they're my favorite celebrity. It worked for them,
yeah.
and this is the way." And you can't divert them otherwise because it's just like they have the belief that this person is the authority, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
anything that they say is just absolute fact.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going down that similar trail of like celebrities is one thing, but I feel like as much as I don't like religion, I feel like the more religion has left our society, we've like left a gap that hasn't been filled in society of A, the like leadership role, and B, the community role. And because people have lost that, they're filling those roles with something else, and it's typically social media, and I would say like for the leadership role, government. And I don't, people are, I think this is like, I'm a little bit of an anarchist, so people might get mad at me for this take. I don't like the blind trust and faith and acceptance some people have of like government, because I like people trust, I this is going to get into anarchist territory. I don't like the blind trust a lot of people have in government, and this is coming from, like, for me, I think it's like because I grew up in a family of anarchists. Like my family's like from India. They had a lot of problems with government. My grandparents were like freedom fighters back there, so like I've had a lot of experience like growing up being told government is not trustworthy and you should not put all your trust here. But I see so many people today, especially like during the pandemic, I think we've seen it more and more. And I think that's why I don't like where like for me, I'm like more of a leftist. I don't necessarily like where a lot of the leftists are going with like putting a lot of like power and faith in government to do things that I don't think I necessarily trust government to do.
Oh yeah, and I'm from the U.S., born in the U.S.
Mm,
I've traveled to parts of the world. In my college I studied in England for study abroad for a little while, and that's so England's got like the UK is the extent of my worldly travels. Like I've never like been to I laid over in Germany in Dusseldorf just in the airport, so that doesn't count.
yeah.
But like I've had the opportunity to kind of see outside of the U.S., but never like too much.
Mm-hmm.
But I do understand and deeply value the nature of our Constitution
Yeah.
because the founders and framers of the Constitution understood and were trying to escape from divinely inspired tyranny. That's why they separated
Mm-hmm.
our government into three branches, even bifurcated the Congress into the House, into the Senate, because they
Yeah.
knew that if power concentrates, that we're just going to be back in tyranny. And you see that a lot
Yes.
with both the left and the right. And in the extreme
Mm-hmm.
ends of both is that they're trying to gain more power and more control. When this, like, if our founders saw this today, they'd be like, you are embedding and facilitating the very thing that we tried to avoid with this document that we wrote
Mm-hmm.
that said, keep like the idea of a federal government was to just be there to just like ensure that all of the states pay their taxes,
Yeah.
to facilitate defense, and to keep the union intact. It wasn't there to be like, hey, you do. It was there to tell the states, hey, you need to pay your dues. We're a union. We're not. It's not just it's not a confederation. It's not a collective, because we tried a confederacy before the Constitution was written, and it didn't work because the central government was like, pay your taxes, and states were just like, no.
No.
And you had more prosperous states than others, and defenses were weak in some areas, and
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work. It failed. and we found a system that works better, but it's not perfect. But the idea was never to be like, have a president who has all of the power, never
Yeah.
have a judicial or a Congress that has all of the power, because it's just going to corrupt, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's a tenet that seems
Yep.
to ring true.
Yeah.
We see it happen. The more power is concentrated, the worse things get, the more control there is. And once you lose your freedoms, you don't get them back, not without a lot of blood being shed in the process.
Yeah, no, for sure. Going through the comments here, Stevie says like government should fear its people, the people shouldn't fear its government. I completely agree with that. I think we're starting to get away from that where people are more scared of government than government has been of the people in a long time. I feel like people no longer have any power, extremely limited, and close to no say in what happens in their country. Yeah, that's another good point. I think we've seen like again we've seen this like a lot during the pandemic, but even like before the pandemic, like I think people are really quick to want to put powers into the like hands of like especially federal government, where I don't think it necessarily needs to be. And I used to, it's kind of funny. I used to not like the American system because I was like, oh, nothing ever gets done. People are constantly stopping each other. And now I'm looking at the U.S. system compared to like ours. Like you guys have the presidential, we have like the parliamentary system, and you guys have like the, I forget what it's called now, but parliamentary system. Our legislative and executive branches work together, so they don't necessarily have to be on the same side, but they'll always like support each other in getting things through. They don't usually fight. They'll like be really cohesive in when they're putting in bills. Whereas in the States, it's like the executive branch and the legislative branch continually fight. Like they're like pretty much their only point is to, like most of the time block each other unless like if like the executive wanted to put something through, the legislative could stop it, or like vice versa. Whereas here, like usually our legislative and executive will just put things through together. And I used to like that because I'm like, oh, you can get a lot done. Like you can do a lot for your people when things need to get done, which is good sometimes. Like for us, like we got our COVID relief package done really quickly. So like Canadians were much better off at the beginning of the pandemic in terms of like we actually had like for people who got laid off because all of our jobs shut down, we got security packages really quickly. But then now we're seeing like a really like we might see a really bad turnaround on that. And I mean, the States is going to feel it anyway because the States has a lot of other economic issues. But like the ability to like for both sides to stop each other a little bit, I think is important so that you don't have like a branch that all works together and just passes things through as they will. Especially in the States where you have like such a back and forth. Like every election, you guys are like Democratic, Republican, and it's like more extreme than Canada is. Like our Democrats and like our right and left groups aren't really super far off from each other, not in like any major ways. Whereas in the States they are. So if you have them working together, all of a sudden you're going to get a bunch of bills passed, and then in the next term they're going to get all rescinded because a different power comes in, and then you're going to have a bunch more passed, and they're all going to get rescinded again because you're just going back and forth. So I kind of actually have started to respect the American system just like more than I have in the past. I don't know which one is better, but I now see like the really good effects of like the American system.
Well, it's our system is like the American system is borrowed. So what we're taking from is we're taking from the ideas of the Roman Republic and of the Greek democracy, and we're taking from very from thoughts of from John Locke of English thought, and we're also taking from I think is Niccolo Machiavelli, and not with the Prince. A lot of people know Machiavelli from the Prince, and that's basically like how to be a prince, be a tyrant when you need to, yada yada. But he also wrote the discourses on the Republic, and Machiavelli states in those works is that the Republic is the most enduring, longest lasting form of government that you can have, and under the right stewardship can endure for an eternity. So, and I'm paraphrasing that, like those aren't his words exactly, but it's the idea is that a direct democracy leads to tyranny. So you need to have the democratic aspect in check with your representatives, which is what we've adopted here in the States. But the problem is that we have a two-party system, and even our first president said like the two-party system is not a good idea. Like it's going to lead to tribalism, and we're just going to be at war with each other over. And we've had a civil war here because of our different ways of thinking. But the idea, and here you have a little bit of the vacuum of religion kind of going into the background, and the politics kind of assuming the role of the religion, because people, whether they're on the left or the right or whatever, they're like, well, I vote on the party line because my party wants me to vote this way, and since they say that this is the way that I should vote, I'm going to vote. Like that's the blind faith that you need.
Yeah.
But it's just, one side says this, and when they have the greater numbers, they get to do what they want, and that's the idea. Like our idea is that both sides, with the Congress and the Senate, even though they're divided in the House, even though they're divided in the Senate, they're supposed to talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's like, I want this. No, I want this. And then they're supposed to talk to each other and meet somewhere in the middle. But what happens here in the US now is that we have things that can be passed on simple majorities, which I think is like 51% or something stupid like
Yeah.
that.
It's like, yeah, you only need like a couple of seats over. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's what's happening right now with, I forget what bill is like, but like you've got like the whole mansion and cinema thing is huge right now where they're blocking that one, is it the voting rights bill or is it something else? I can't remember which bill it is now. People are really mad at those two because they're blocking it in the House.
Yeah, because it's being passed along party lines, which
Yeah.
I think is the incorrect way to ever get things done, is to pass it on a party line, because you're excluding an entire half of the other population. Like,
Yeah,
you're
you're
making it good
50%
for
of your
some people
country.
and not for others.
Yeah. Yeah, going
And it
through.
looks like
Yeah,
you
a
have
couple
some comments there, so I'll let you get to them.
So often that majority of people oppose a bill, legislation, but it gets overruled because their reps don't give an F about their communities. Yeah, I think this is a huge issue right now. We're seeing definitely in Canada quite a bit, especially along the last like couple of years, I guess to say. But like we have like a lot of our representatives don't really represent their constituents. Like they'll run along party, like they'll run on their own platforms, but then once they're in, they'll vote along party lines. Because up here we've got a pretty strict party discipline. Like there's not a lot of like once you get, if you're in, like even if you get voted in on a certain platform, there's no chance that you're voting against your own party. Because we have a really strict system up here. So I think that's like a big issue that I've had with Canada's party, especially after taking some like law and like Canadian law like classes and stuff. I start to see how like BS that is, because all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, like our government, like even if someone wanted to disagree with their party, like if they didn't agree or they believe that their constituents wouldn't like a certain bill that's being passed, they still have to vote for it because our party discipline is super strict. Like you'll get kicked out of the party pretty much if like you vote against the party. Let's see. The American system is designed so that things don't get passed through quickly unless they're extremely popular. So popular that you can get almost 2/3 of people to agree on it. Yeah, and I think that's what it should be. But as Sin was saying here, like right now you can get like even if you can get a 51% majority right now, you can get things through. And I don't know if I necessarily like that, because like now you're like, again, like you said, you're like leaving out 50% of your population who might not agree with this bill being passed or like these like type of policies, but that doesn't get taken into consideration because all you need is that 51%. You just need one person to flip, and that's like this whole, again, going back to the mansion and cinema issue right now that's happening with, I can't remember which bill is it trying to be passed. I know at one point it was the COVID relief, but I don't think that's the one that's still stuck, is it? Or is it? Oh shit, is it still the COVID relief pill that you guys are stuck on? Do you know?
Not entirely. I need to be more versed on what's going on, and it's like this. I'm here talking about ethical and political things and ignorant of what's happening immediately
That's
in my
okay.
country. So take that with a grain of salt.
That's all right. I'm really into the politics community right now. Like that's all I watch most of the time. A strange kid I am. That's okay. I'll accept it, because my friends are like asking me. They're like, "Oh, like you watch this politics stuff a lot?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, and they're like, "So how often do you watch?" And I was like, "I'm like daily." And they're like, "Oh, okay." No, it's the vote. Oh, voting rights bill. Okay, it was the vote. I was right the first time. It was the voting rights bill. But yeah, because like two Democratic senators are like won't get on board with it. Like people are super pissed because if like with those two people, if they could like if they flipped, if they like voted with the party, like the Democratic Party, I think it would get passed through. But people are really mad because they're abiding by their constituents rather than party lines.
Yes,
Which I don't
they're
necessarily
doing.
fault them for, because like again, if they want to get reelected, like it doesn't matter if like the party likes them, it matters if their constituents like them.
Yes, and we do have that working in our favor, and I think that taking that stance with what your constituents would want is the right stance, because you are like, that's what a representative government is that you're representing their interests. And if you don't represent their interests, they're just going to boot you out and put someone else in who does. It's not going to
Exactly.
be the actual parties that have the control over that. It's the people, which is it's where the direct control of the government comes from. Here is where power is derived from the people. And if people really kind of understood that they have more power than they really understand, instead of being like, oh, I really like this person, and I want to put them in office because they're cute or they're handsome or they're beautiful or they
Trudeau.
sound nice, for reasons that they don't really, that have nothing to do with the actual governance of the country, but they're more for superficial reasons. Like that is problematic. But I think that those people
That's
who are
literally
holding
our
out,
prime minister right now. Trudeau
yeah,
fucking got in on his good looks. I swear to God. The amount of moms that I heard, it's like, I voted for Trudeau because he's cute. And I was like, holy shit.
right, right. And
Oh
if
my
he was
God.
and if he was like if he was the best person for the job, and that's saying that let's put them in a very blank, nondescript, like they could be either gender, no gender, but also at the same time very ugly, but still the best person for the job,
Yeah.
running against an ignorant, handsome, or beautiful person.
Yeah.
The other person that had, but also like the terrible, the most worst person, that worst person is going to get it because people are like, I like looking at them. I don't like looking at them. I understand they're going to do great things, but I'm going to have to see them every day.
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that.
Oh yeah. I mean, up here, it's hard to say because our other candidates, like in the first time Trudeau won, our other candidate was like literally just a blatant racist. Like we had Stephen Harper, I don't even know how to say his name. Holy shit. He was trying to get bills passed that basically, because my parents were immigrants, I was born here. My parents are immigrants, but my like dad came here when he was 6. My mom came here when she was 4. Like they were pretty young, but like I would technically be, because he wanted to put this bill through, it would have made me a second class citizen. Like if your parents were immigrants, if you were the child of an immigrant, you would still be considered like be able to like deport you back to whatever country your parents came from if you got in trouble with the law. Like that's the level of like bill he was trying to get passed. So he got out, that was fine. But then in this last election, we had Trudeau and our other 2 candidates. None of them were great. Like people like Jagmeet Singh's, like, which was our most far left party, is the NDP, and like he was good, but he was too ignorant to be to be prime minister yet. Like he was young, and I think he was too idealistic, and like people didn't trust that. And then we obviously have Quebec, which is super racist. He never would have won because of that. And then we had like our Conservative Party member, who I actually liked a lot of his policies, but I think a lot of people still. This is like the whole thing of voting down party lines, is like people will vote for Trudeau because they don't want to vote right wing. And I know a lot of people who are like this, and I talked to a lot of people during the last election who like would not disclose that they voted for the Conservative Party because of the way they thought their friends would look at them. But they're like, I don't like what Trudeau's doing, and I don't think Jagmeet Singh is ready to be our prime minister. So a lot of them voted Conservative. However, they would not tell anyone that because they're like, I don't want to get looked at the wrong way because I voted against what the like majority of people believe here, which is like, like we're much more liberal up here. And even our Conservative Party is not that conservative, but like even at that extent, people like, it's like that whole idea of religion, right? Like people like will like vote because that's what everyone around them is like expecting them to do, or like they won't tell what they actually did because they feel embarrassed about it for some reason, which is crazy. XTV says the problem is the federal government's actions shouldn't really have an effect on the day-to-day lives of citizens. However, more and more people are delegating responsibilities that belong to the states and local government to the federal. Yeah, no, for sure. I think in the states it's a huge problem. Even in Canada, like we have a little bit more federal power, so it's a little different. But in the states, for sure.
Yeah, and that embarrassment, that hiddenness of how you voted, that's exist. You've seen this from the outside. Like I lived in it, but like when Donald Trump was elected,
Yeah.
whether you voted for or against him, and even like in the next election that came with the current president Joe Biden,
Yeah.
people would not disclose how they voted for fear of how people would react around them.
Yeah.
Not just like, sure, like, yeah, you can have people around you who are going to be either Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, but people out of fear that their neighbors would enact violence against them would and it's good to be secret. Like the whole idea behind the ballot is it's secret, it's safe,
Yeah.
it's confidential, but that there was fear for you to look at and even in your own house and in your own family to be like, I voted for him or I voted for the other person, and they'd be like, oh, you're a terrible individual. You would burn. You don't believe in America. You would let this country burn to the ground. And I mean, like, but we see this. We do have like the like Stevie mentioned, is that there's a lot of power in the federal government. We put this kind of deify, like,
Yeah.
we had the whole insurrection, and it was an insurrection that did occur. Like I'm pretty adamant in the fact, like, there was a directive to overturn the elections, and that's something that needs to be like that's within the state's purview. I believe in the state's power, and if they convened, like they should, like had a convention to see if they needed to re-examine all of their ballots, then that was something that they needed to decide collectively, and that's totally within their power to do because they're the ones that are deciding how the nation is going to be federally governed. And I believe that's within the state's power, and that's right of them to decide amongst each other. But we had one person who people believed in blindly, like we won, like that's what people would think is like it comes down to winners and losers. The winners feel good, and when they lose, they feel bad, and they want to ignore the events of history. I'm not saying, whether or not, like, I'm not going to question or enable legitimacy or illegitimacy of the result, but like things happened, people weren't happy, and they rioted, and this was because an individual that people blindly believe in,
Oh yeah.
because they like the guy, they like the celebrity, basically said, you know what, he didn't get his way, so let's just burn the place to the ground and let's overturn it. And that's very dangerous, that person in a federal position had that much control over the populace to do their will. It should never be us doing the federal government's will, period.
And
it should be the federal government and the state governments doing our will as people.
I was gonna say it was like crazy because I think if it was a different president, and I don't think any president who didn't know that they had that cultish following could do it, but it was the fact that Donald Trump knew he had that level of like cultish following of like he didn't, I don't even think he necessarily had to say the words of like go riot to like be able to rile people up enough to like go and do like violent acts, right? Like he knew he had that power, that if he just said like the right key phrases, it didn't even have to be like a strict incitement to violence. He just had to say the right phrases and people would go ballistic. And like I think that's what happened is like he said these like very key words. He like dog whistled very hard of like, they've stolen your election, you can't trust this government, we need to take back. He never technically said you have to go riot, but he said all the right things to get people riled up enough that he knew that that could be an outcome, right? And I think that was like the issue, is like you had like a cultish personality as like your figurehead, and he took advantage of like his cult, right? And like that was like the whole problem with that deification of him, is like people blindly followed like as if he was like a religion. And it was like, holy shit.
And there was the meme going around of calling him God Emperor Trump. And there were people out there who did legitimately believe that. Like it started out as a meme that he was the God Emperor, and it started becoming reality. And that was terrifying because that's never like our government, our system of governance was designed to safeguard us against those individuals, that ensured that even if they got into power, that they would run into roadblocks like our Congress and our Senate. But he was so fortunate that it was already in Republican control. So all he had to do is be there to put the seal of approval on there. And if they didn't do what he wanted, like his own party, he could either use his power of personality to be like, hey, guys, don't vote for that guy next time the elections come up. Vote for this guy who likes me better. And people would do it. And then he would also be like, well, if you don't do it, like I need these things in here for me. Like he's even come out on record, like when they were like, oh, like you've taken advantage of tax and blah, blah, blah. Like you should have paid way more in taxes. And he's like, well, the system was made in such a way that it allowed me to do this. And if you didn't want me to do it, then the system shouldn't be like this. But now he was in a position to be like, well, the system can now work in my benefit more because I'm the one that can either veto this or approve it. So, and of course, like the thing that we're falling into that's really dangerous is that we're getting party judiciary. We have a party Congress. We have a party executive. So if they all end up in one party, then they just do whatever they want without any type of repercussion. They just
Are you all
pass.
Democratic right now? I
No.
thought the judiciary is still dominated by...
So there's a very slim majority in the House, and the Senate is only a Democratic majority if the vice president has to cast the tiebreaker. So that there is conflict in the Democratic Party helps prevent some tyranny. So yeah, Stevie said the Senate is split evenly. And that's
I thought you guys
case.
still had a Republican majority still in the Senate. I don't know why.
No, but it'll probably flip again because every 2 years there's midterm elections, which is for Congress, and then every 4 years presidential.
House is
So
Democratic. That
there's
one
a
I knew.
chance that it can flip. But like in an ideal situation, you might have a Republican House, a Democratic Senate, and then you have an executive who might be one or the other. So it would force
Mm-hmm.
some sort of cooperation between the branches to get things done. And that's what the founders wanted. They wanted to have things take time to pass because they would have to really sit down and talk about these topics and be like, these affect the way that that our nation is run.
Mm-hmm.
And from a federal level, these are going to affect people who live in the states, and we need to compromise. The idea behind our original government system was compromise, but there's no
Yeah.
compromise now when you need a simple majority. And that's like,
Mm-hmm.
I think Stevie mentioned the idea of a 2/3 majority, or 60% at least. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we do need that. We do need to have people like that actually have to cross the aisle, because
Yeah.
we need to have that compromise built in for there to be balance. But it's imbalance. It's either swings to one extreme or the other, and that's been our cycle for like since the party systems have been. Like, we do have periods of prosperity and cooperation, but
Mm-hmm.
then there are just times where it's just like a party's in control, everything is passed by that party line.
Mm-hmm.
Then it swings the other side, and then they're like, well, we're going to do everything we want now. And that's kind of what's occurring, that people are seeing, is that like, oh,
Yeah.
when Trump was in power, the Republicans did everything they wanted, and now that Biden's in power, the Democrats are doing everything we want. And like, people are like, we don't want either of that. And some people are
Yeah.
like, yeah, we want that. We
Yeah.
just want to
For
win. We
sure.
want to be in control, and we're fighting with each other about it.
Well, that's like again, like it's going back to like your little like current example of like the voting rights bill. People are so mad at Manchin and Cinema who like aren't voting with the party line. And I think that's the problem with having that 51-49. Like that's all you need is now, even if like a couple people who aren't Democratic don't vote with the party, those people are getting all the flack. Whereas like if you had a 60-30 necessary, all of a sudden like even if two Democrats didn't go, you have a bunch of other people that you need to get on board anyway, so people wouldn't go so hard at like the one or two people who didn't, right? And like so now it's like, but now it's like people are like really mad at these two people because it's like, well, you're not doing what we want. And it's like, well, they're not supposed to do exactly what you want. You live in California. These people run in like highly like split states, right? Like if you're like, I think it's Manchin who's like, I don't remember where they're from, but like their states are both like very close to being like flip states. And like in their next, if you want to keep the House Democratic, like the majority Democrat, you're gonna have to keep those people because the states that they run in are pretty like much flip states. So if you have anyone who's any more left than those two candidates, you're gonna lose them in the next election. Like you're screwed. So like you're all of a sudden gonna have like, would you rather have like two Democratic senators who don't vote with you, or would you rather give the House all of a sudden to Republicans because those two people get voted out next time because all of a sudden their own constituents don't like them anymore?
And I think that's a finer point that a lot of people are missing, is that
Mm-hmm.
if they just kowtow to the party line, like, they're basically going to give away what little advantage that they have. Like,
Mm-hmm.
those two people being gone is basically, it flips it. It flips it entirely.
Yep.
And there's a bigger picture that people are just looking at. It's like the whole saying, like, people are failing to see the forest for the trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that they're just looking at like immediately now, like, just get in line. We need this passed. That's all you have to do is play for this team. And it's like, well, the team is actually the people of the United States. That's the team that you're on. You're not on. And there's Stevie is saying like they think that this bill is worth losing the Senate split, and it's not. It's not,
It's
because
not. It definitely
just
isn't.
it's
People
just
have
a
no
piece
like
of
long term.
legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's gonna cause more, like, it can cause even worse things, because like we also have that proverb, right? Like, the road to hell is paved in good intentions, and like this has the best intent, but it can have the worst result.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at what's immediately in front of them and not something that's much larger that needs to be maintained. And like, I think Stevie also mentioned that like the judiciary is conservative leaning, and that's correct. And that's because when the Senate was Republican controlled, they used what was called the nuclear option. That meant that when you had to make a judiciary pick, and to the Supreme Court, our highest court in the land, a lifelong position, that you only needed to have 51 votes to get that. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is a lifelong position, and it needed to stay at that 60 vote threshold.
Yeah.
You needed to have people say, not to put this judge on there because they're conservative or liberal, but because this justice is going to serve the best interests of the nation. And you have to have that compromise.
Yeah.
It is a very important job that you're putting someone in there for, that they cannot leave unless they become like deemed unfit for office. Like they would literally have to go crazy, like show up to hearings like naked or something absurd for them to be deemed unfit for office. And they're just like, no, like we're just going to change the rule. So now all you need is a simple majority to put someone in a lifelong position. And now they're seeing like the split. Like if Biden gets to choose a Supreme Court justice, same rule, 51, like a simple majority. And this is this is the problem. Like it needs to be something that requires compromise, because you're putting someone into a position with tremendous power, even though they're on a council of 8, right? I think it's 8 or 9. I think it's 9.
I think it's 9.
Sorry for being a terrible American. But yeah, it's 9. But it's like they wield tremendous power. And if you're just making it based off of ideology, then you're not making it for the rule of law, which is something like, if you're irreligious, like that's something that we can all kind of believe in common, is that if we're not equal before God, like because of the different types of religion, at least we should be equal before the law of our land, regardless of our
absolutely,
belief.
for sure. I think that's why the nuclear option was actually brought in by Harry Reid back in 2013. Harry Reid was a Democratic senator. I don't know enough about that to say anything. I've heard the name. I don't know what the situation was. But what I was going to say is this is why I kind of don't like the idea of like this whole, you guys, like I know last year is a big hot topic, or like 2 years ago is a big hot topic of this idea of packing the courts. And like, I don't like that, because it's like, this should be something that remains as is, because I think it's like your most like, even if someone is like conservative, like Republican or Democrat, I think your judiciary tends to be like a little bit more equalized, even with like, I don't think Republicans, judicial officials and stuff like that, like don't swing super hard typically. I think most of the people who get put in those positions have to be like a little bit less biased. I want to say that because I feel like your judicial system, or like, yeah, your judiciary hasn't been super biased in history. Well, maybe it has. Maybe I'm only thinking like last 10 years. I'm pretty young. So as far as I know, but I don't like that idea of packing the courts, because all of a sudden all you're trying to do is like pack your idea in, and then the next person who comes in, they're just going to pack it even more. And now they're going to pack it enough that I can swing to their side and stuff, right?
Yeah. And so for historical context, yes, our judiciary has been horribly biased in the past, especially in post-Reconstruction, post-Civil War era, when we had
no, for sure. That far back, yeah, I would assume so.
like separate but equal, like that, how there was segregation, because it was like, oh, like as long as it's separate but equal, it's fine. That was the wrong approach, like the completely wrong approach. I think that was Dred Scott. There was, or no, Dred Scott, I think he was a runaway slave. But that was one of the rulings throughout our judicial history that was just like wrong, absolutely the wrong call. But it was made based off of a bias towards a way of thinking, rather than the idea of a higher, like of a law being almost divine. Like from my understanding, like what justice is, and this is coming from like John Rawls. He's a philosopher of who wrote The Theory of Justice. And there are other theories of justice out there. Of course, like his is the definitive and never will be, because we're human and we're flawed. But there's this idea that there is an objective justice out there. It's something beyond us. It's not something tangible. It's ethereal, but it exists. Kind of like God would. Like and if God can't exist universally, at least justice does. And there's just that happens, and we're trying to pervert our system in such a way that it's like law is better if you're liberal, law is better for you if you're conservative, and that's what they tried to do with our court by passing in justices along party lines. And thank you for Stevie for correcting. I welcome corrections, because I'm not like a historian or anything. So if people have the proper knowledge and the facts, please present them to me, because I need those things to reevaluate my own way of thinking. But like one thing that was good, even though that they put in 2 conservative justices, 3 actually, Gorsuch, Comey Barrett, and Kavanaugh, forced them in. 3, when it came to things, especially like overturning the results, like the president and Roosevelt thought this too, and he was FDR wanted to pack the courts back in the day too because the justices weren't doing what he wanted.
Yeah.
But that's what something that Trump at the time thought like, well, I gave you your job, you're going to work for me, and thankfully on constitutional matters they sided with the Constitution rather than the individual who helped
That's
put them there.
I think that's the thing that made me think, like, obviously in history, like if we go back like far enough, you're gonna find like a lot of like the judiciary obviously was not very fair to like most people. However, I think over the last like 5 to 10 years, I'd say, like from what I've seen, like especially over that like Trump thing, a lot of people thought that the judiciary would side with him because he gave like three of those people were put in by him, but they didn't. They didn't back him, which was really, really impressive to a lot of people, I think, which is sad to say that that was like an impressive thing. But I think it was good that it set that precedent of like, just because these people were put in by like their side, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to vote along that side, right? Like they're not going to like just blindly support that leader.
Yeah. And FDR experienced that in his time too, because he was like, I put you on the bench, you're going to do what I say. And I think that was I think it was during the era of trust busting, and I could be mistaken. Like I'm kind of cloudily, vaguely remembering things from like high school history that I was taught. But that was one of the things that he was. And then he threatened them. He's like, "Well, if you're not going to do what I want, then I'm just going to put more justices on the bench until I get my way." And that threat of packing the courts was enough for justices to reconsider their thoughts on some matters of judicial interest that kind of turned them. But like that was, it was a threat that, and whether their decisions were good or bad, I can't speak to because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. I just have passing knowledge. But like that they changed their mind based off of a threat instead of adhering to something higher of a higher principle was unfortunate. Like that set precedent. Like sometimes threats are enough to make changes happen, and that's not necessarily what it should be. It should always be compromise and recognizing that there's something higher, not just the law, but like the whole nation is a higher ideal that we share.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's also why the judiciary was like made as it was. Like that's a pretty permanent position, right? And I think it's so you have less fear of that threat. Like once you're in, you can't be taken advantage of by the president or the leader, whoever it is, because that person can't really threaten your position anymore once you're in.
Yeah, but the negative thing is, especially now that it's a simple majority, is that you have justices who, and I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who like held on to like her death for her seat, so that way in hopes that another Democratic leader would be able to put another democratically chose president or justice onto her, like replace her. Like that's not doing the job to the best of your ability, in my opinion. Like she held on beyond her ability. Like she knew that she probably should have retired way before that, but fear of the court leaning too far in one direction, like to protect the court, held on way past her time, when that should have never been an issue of partisanship within the court from either side. Like she should have been able to recognize and been safe in her ability to retire, knowing that her constituents, that the Senate, that the Congress, that the executive will do their best to choose the right person for the job to take her place, and not live in fear that I'm going to be replaced by somebody who's going to bow to an ideology rather than what's objectively important, which is the law.
I think that was, I remember when she passed, like there was a lot of people, like, obviously a lot of people mourned her death and were really upset that she was gone because people really liked her as a judiciary. However, I know there was a lot of backlash too of people saying she should have stepped down under Obama because, to be fair, Obama asked her to resign during his tenure, but she refused. Yeah, see, a lot of people are mad that she refused that because they're like, Obama, like when we had a Democratic president, we could have had him, her step down, and he could have put in someone on that side of the party, but she refused and kept going, and then she ended up passing during a Republican presidentship. All of a sudden, that's not the right word.
Presidency.
Presidency. Okay, I'm losing my mind. Yeah, she like then she passed away during a Republican presidency, and people were really upset because they're like, well, if she had stepped down at the time, then we wouldn't have had this issue. But again, that goes back to the idea of like we shouldn't be so scared to have it lean one way or the other that it's like we're like betting on people's like not dying until our party is back, like the party we want is back in power.
Yeah, and I understand that like part of her, sticking around as long as she did too was also to protect Roe v. Wade. Like she was one of the deciding voices that would either keep the tenets of Roe v. Wade in place, or she would like that position would overrule it. And that's what like a lot of the partisanship and conservative versus liberal ideas are coming. Like we want a justice who is either going to preserve Roe v. Wade or who is going to abolish, like overturn Roe v. Wade. That's the correct term, is overturn it. And that's the issue of reproductive rights. Like that's a very important issue. And personally, I don't think that's something that should be decided by a male majority, because that's not something that we experience. Most, like there are some intersex people who like will appear male but maybe actually get like pregnant as female. Like there are
or like trans
outliers.
people even, like, right, but obviously we're not that
trans
progressive
people too. Yeah, but like the idea is like me personally is that when it comes to the reproductive rights of individuals, it's not for a man and a male only perspective to say like, hey, you can do this with your body or not do this with your body. Like I feel like there needs, like that's an important part where there needs to be representation. Like women have better understanding of their own bodies than I will ever have. Like I'm never gonna say like maybe if I was in an alternate universe I could be an expert at picking up women, but I'll never be expert at understanding them because I'm not one.
Yeah.
And I'll never, like, even if I transitioned, I would still be wrestling with the question of like what it is to be a woman, what is womanly, and I only have that male perspective. So then I would have to like talk to other women who were born biologically female and be like, so it's like, what's it like being female? Like what are what are the norms? What are the things you've experienced, and like all those things? Like, because I don't have that understanding. But that's, I'm getting off into the weeds. But like,
yeah, for sure.
that was what she was, in my opinion, that she was protecting.
So there's oh yeah, sorry, you can finish.
Yeah, go ahead. You can.
There's kind of like two things there that I want to address. And like one is the idea that she stayed in to protect it. Obviously now, right now, it's like I don't know how much you've heard about it, but there is like the deciding factor, like whether they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't think it's going to happen. I have a lot of faith that it won't happen. I don't see it happening. However, this could go either way. It could get overturned. I don't think it will. Maybe that's a gut instinct kind of like reaction. But I think even if she had passed away at the time, or like she had resigned at the time, I don't know if it, at worst, it'll just be sent back to the States. Yeah, I don't like the idea of it going back to the States because I think there's a lot of states that are way too conservative about that stuff, and we'd end up in a bad situation again as well there. But I don't know if that was necessarily a reason for her to stay in past her time, because I think it made things worse overall. And then we had all these issues of like people wanting to pack the courts and like people getting mad because like Trump was able to pick the next judiciary. That's a whole other issue, and that's fine. But I don't know if that's necessarily the reason she should have stayed in. And B, this is kind of off tangenting from the politics part, but me and my friends were actually having a conversation about that idea of like people who need to be in the conversation and representation when it comes to talking about these issues. I don't think you necessarily need to be a woman to have an opinion on these things. And I used to be like that, where I'm like, oh, well, if you're not a woman, you don't get or if you like no uterus, no opinion, or like we were talking about, for us, like we were, all three of us are, minority backgrounds. So we were talking about how like people will say like, oh, if you're not X minority, you can't talk about these issues, like keep your mouth shut on these issues. And I used to be like that, I think, when I was like high school, first year out of high school kind of thing, where I was like pretty leftist, saying like, oh, like, like this is our issue to talk about and like other people shouldn't have. It's like, but I'm like, man, if you're like someone who understands these things better than I do, like if you're like, let's say a white person or something that like has a better sociological understanding of what the issues are, I don't think that should, like, you being white should preclude you from being in that conversation. Same thing as like, I don't think you being a man should preclude you from like engaging and like having an opinion on these conversations. Maybe it shouldn't be the deciding factor, but especially in like something like a judiciary where you should be knowledgeable and educated enough to know that these issues need to have like shouldn't just be an ideology and rather should be like a well thought out like reasoning. I think that's like kind of like I don't like that idea of like, well, if you're not X, then you can't decide X, or you shouldn't be involved in the conversation on X, or you shouldn't have like I I used to agree with that. I don't think I do anymore because I think having personal experience doesn't necessarily make you the expert. And I've noticed this over the last year is people who are like, well, I understand like X issue better than you because I'm part of like, let's say like with, I think trans issues is a good one. Trans people will be like, well, I understand transness better than talking to like someone who's like, you know, maybe a medical expert. It's like, I understand these things better than you because I am trans. And it's like, well, no, but do you understand how all these things work, how the neural networks work, how this, like, you might not, like, just because you're trans, you understand the trans experience, doesn't necessarily you understand, like, the psychology and the medical science behind transness just because you are trans. So I don't know if we should necessarily exclude people out of conversations because of those, like, because of, like, who they are.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. So you touched down on a couple of important things here. Is one, the idea of excluding people from a conversation because of their how they exist in the world, and that itself invalidates a logical argument for people who say that because it's what's called, for those who are unaware, an ad hominem fallacy, which is Latin for at the person, as you're saying that because you're this person, clearly your reasoning is wrong, and I don't agree with that. I think that I do believe in representation. I think that the conversation needs to happen, and it needs to happen with a diverse set of people with diverse experiences, because that's the only way we're ever really going to understand each other as a whole. The idea of humanity and what it is to coexist. And yeah, like a personal experience is a primary source, but it doesn't necessarily make you an expert. And I think that having people who are interested in the plights of others, especially if they're coming from a privileged position and they're recognizing their privilege and they're seeing that other people are oppressed, is also important. Because they're seeing that there's something wrong with the way that the system is, and maybe there are things that need to be changed to make it more inclusive for people. And that's something that we can only reach by having a discussion with each other from a very diverse perspective. But I never think I don't want to say never, because that's also like an extreme. Like I don't want to put that out there, but I think that we do need to. We can't just have one set of people deciding everything for everyone.
Yeah.
Because it's only coming from one biased viewpoint, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Even if it can produce societal good, like low crime rates, like you can say all these utilitarian things, like like look at the way our opinion has been. We've ruled. The country's been peaceful. Crime is low. There's prosperity, but that doesn't mean that the system is right. Like there could be people who are oppressed, who are slaves, right? Like you could have a really economically prosperous country, but 60% of the people, and we had that in America. People were literally slaves. People were literally slaves, and it led to prosperity. And that's a huge issue, because that's something that is like all men are created equal except slaves, like in quotation marks.
Yeah, exactly.
little footnote at the end there. Slaves are not people actually, and therefore they don't have to be. Like, okay, we have a fundamental problem here that we need to discuss.
Hello, Esther Pineapple Dan NPR on Twitch. Let's go. Yeah, crazy. Just a couple points even back to that. Like, one thing I like to always say is like when we were having this conversation a couple of weeks ago with some friends, it was we were talking about how like when we exclude people out of the conversations, like I remember I was watching like I think I was on like politics on TikTok or something, like a lot of kids on TikTok like engage in politics, but this girl she's like if you're not black you can't talk on black issues, like keep your nose out of black issues and stuff. But I'm like, the thing is, it might be a black issue, but you still live in society with every other group. So you can't say that this is a black issue and we're going to fix it this way, because your fixes is still going to affect everyone else in the society. Like, you cannot separate your issue from society, and so like everyone in society has to have an opinion on it or has to be able to have an opinion on it because everyone's going to have to be subject to whatever consequence or resolution we come to. Yeah, I think that was like kind of the big point. I don't even remember what else I was going to say to that, but yeah, I think that was like the big thing was like just being able to like have everyone engage in those conversations is important because we all do have to like somewhat come together to make the resolutions happen.
Right. And this goes like that idea of even sometimes the like, well, the minority clearly controls the majority in America because it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's a small minority of people in government who control the majority like of the populace, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
330 million people ish in America, handled by a few hundred. That's skewed way in the few controlling the many. But like you had in Canada a very popular and controversial figure in Dr. Jordan Peterson,
Oh
who was
yeah.
like, yeah, he came out with like in his idea, and I'm not going to speak for him, but from what I understand about his argument is that like there's free speech in the US and free speech in Canada are completely different things. Like there's no real like hardcore guarantee to it in
Mm-hmm.
Canada. And he was opposed to the idea of legislation saying that I must refer to someone as this or that, or I will be legally penalized for it.
Yeah.
And that's the people in the minority like, yes, like I will finally be recognized, but because you're being forced to. And for me, like that's not necessarily a problem. If someone says to me like, oh, I prefer being a they them or a he she or whatever their
Mm-hmm.
pronouns are, it's for me a matter of respect. Like
Mm-hmm.
I respect the other person's existence.
Yeah.
I respect them as a person. And if they identify, like, because of course we live in a world of infinite possibilities, we don't know everything. So if someone's questioning themselves and they're comfortable with their person as being this or that,
Mm-hmm.
and if I care about them as a person and I love them as a person, I'm talking about like a universal love, then of course I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna be like, hey, like, okay, like if I made the mistake of you look female and I
Yeah.
say, oh, she's a cool streamer, and you're like, actually, wait a minute, I prefer to be addressed as this instead.
Mm-hmm.
I can acknowledge the mistake, like, oh, I'm sorry for assuming, but like acknowledging that mistake, be like, okay, well, out of respect for your life and your existence, then I will refer to you as you prefer to be, because that's just like that's being a
Yeah.
good
Common
person and is
courtesy.
good
Yeah.
in itself. But I shouldn't have the law telling me that if I call you by something wrong and maybe accidentally or incidentally, that now I'm going to get fined or thrown in prison, as
Yeah.
an extreme, like for disobeying this edict. Like I shouldn't be forced to, but I should make the call out of respect, but also not be like a troll and be like, no, I'm just not going to
Yeah.
acknowledge your point of view at all. Like it's what I think is what I think, and your voice has nothing to do with the matter.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily like the because I don't think that bill like Jordan Peterson did blow that bill out of proportion on what it actually stated because I'm pretty sure it just added trans people to a protected class like within our Bill of Rights or whatever. It's like they just got added like what it simply said. I think like the simple interpretation was it just got added like this is now a protected class. Like if you're like your sexual identity or your gender identity is now part of the protected class, so you can't like discriminate based on that. But I think people ran with it saying like, oh, we can't misgender without going to prison, which I don't think, obviously it's not true. However, if it were to be true, I wouldn't agree with it because I don't think words other than like things that are direct incitement to violence or like obviously could get people extremely hurt like physically or like put people in extreme danger like yelling fire in a theater and stuff like that. Other than like those exceptions, I don't think we should ever limit speech for two reasons. And my parents taught me both of these. My dad always said, he's like, when I moved here back in the day, at least I always knew who the racists were. And I thought that was a really interesting point because I think now it we think the world has changed so much, but you might never know because like people just have to hide it because you can't be openly racist in our society as much anymore because you will get like punished for it, which I think is good. But I think it's kind of interesting that like my dad will sit there and say like, I miss the times when I knew why something might have happened to me, right? And the other one was like, my dad always taught me was like, I can't remember how the actual saying goes, but basically like someone who's like forced to change their mind is of an unchanged mind still, right? Like so they'll say all the right things, they'll like speak like as if they've changed their mind, but because they were forced to change their behavior, they don't actually change their mind. Like they'll still intrinsically have these values and beliefs, but they'll never actually really change what they believe because they've been forced into a certain position without actually being explained or like reasoned or debated into why. I think those
Yeah.
are like two things that I kind of hold when I like talk about these issues is like I think that's the problem with like trying to like push like uber progressiveness, especially under law, is like you're not going to have people who like actually just change their opinion. You're going to have a bunch of people who are super angry at government because they like forced them to speak and act a certain way. So I think like the better idea is just to slowly progress society and get people more on board with your ideas and like what's okay in society.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of us generally don't like being forced to do something. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, me personally, I've grown up as like I was the firstborn in my family, and I value my own personal freedom freedom immensely. Like
Mm-hmm.
my own personal freedom is one of my highest values, and I was one of those kids that if I was pretty good at managing myself until someone told me what to do. So like I'd get home as a kid, get my homework on the desk,
Mm-hmm.
get ready to do it, and then my mom would come and be like, "Be sure to do your homework," and then I just not do it.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I was doing this voluntarily, like I was getting ready to voluntarily do this, but you telling me like do your homework. I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like now you've
Yeah.
taken my agency away, and I want nothing to do with this
I was
now.
that kid, I understand. Yeah, I was totally the same way, so I completely understand that mentality. You know, you're doing the dishes, and your parents walk in and be like, "Hey, make sure to clean up the kitchen," and you're like, "Fuck it, I'm not doing it now."
Exactly. And that's I've got like I've been punished, and they're like, you wouldn't be punished if you just did what we told you. And I'm like, I was already like, and then I just get more punished because I'm smarting off now. I'm
Yeah,
like, I was already doing it, or I was in the process of like get like, can you see that I was prepping here? Like it was gonna happen, and then you told me to do this, and now I don't want to because my agency is gone. I wanted to do something because I felt like doing it. It's the right thing for the household, and I'm being responsible. And now you're telling
yeah.
me, and I have no agency, and now I'm resisting because it's just like I don't want to do it because there's this authority that's saying I must, and I can't.
I think this also goes back to our earlier conversation. I think we sometimes want to feel like we're doing the right thing because we're doing the right thing and we're being responsible. Like, look at me, I'm taking care of myself, I'm doing my homework on my own, I'm not being asked to do the dishes, I'm not being asked to clean up, and I'm just doing it. I'm taking charge, I'm taking the lead, and I'm doing this, and I'm going to get recognized for it. And then when you get asked to do it, you feel like all of that, like, that piece of recognition that you were hoping to get is like gone. It's like my parents are gonna come home. They're gonna be so proud because the kitchen's clean. They're gonna like feel so good. Or like I'm doing homework. And my parents didn't have to ask me to do it. They're gonna be so happy. They'll be like, you know. And then all of a sudden they walk in. They ask you to do it, and you like lose that ability to like have that like moment of pride. Almost. Maybe that's more of like a maybe that's a more personal thing because like I definitely was that way where I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this and like everyone like it's good because I'm like doing it on my own. I'm not being asked and like my parents are gonna be happy with that because I'm like becoming more responsible. And then they ask you to do it and you're like, fuck. And I can't even
Yeah,
take that like idea of like responsibility that like that was my own free will and I did that on my own and that was you know I was
yeah.
good. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's a proud moment. I think feeling good about things, that shouldn't be the reason for doing things, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely a motivator. And it
Yeah.
does genuinely like when you do something on your own and it benefits others and yourself, or maybe it just benefits others, but you do something that you still feel good about it. That's a great feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and it's awesome to embrace. But when people come in and then they tell you to do it and they undermine you or they control the situation without
Mm-hmm.
your permission, and they just they just kind of eliminate that agency, then it feels terrible, right?
Yeah.
Like you're like, does this is the good feeling's gone. Why should I like I feel like crap. The work that I put forth is going to be crap because like it's all of those positive indicators are gone, and now I want like now I have like I'm going in the complete opposite direction, and
Yeah.
like especially with waking up, I always wake up before my alarm
Mm-hmm.
every time as a kid. Wake up like 20, 30 minutes before my alarm,
Yeah.
getting ready for school. Mom comes in, time to wake up and get ready for school. Back in bed, fighting, in trouble because now I'm oversleeping because I'm absolutely resisting because I
Oh
was already
yeah.
doing the right thing, but now I'm told that I have to do the right thing. I'm like, I already was. You just didn't see it.
Yeah.
Now I'm
I
resisting.
didn't get
Now
that
I'm,
recognition for doing the right thing.
yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like if you would have just waited for like 5 minutes, you would have seen that I was going to come out of my room fully dressed, backpack, ready to go. Let's go to school. I'm happy. Let's do it. And now I'm like, I hate this place. I don't want to be there. I don't want to go there. I don't even want to do my homework. Just like
Yeah.
now I'm in trouble and I'm grounded because of this one interaction that started the day. And it was just all it took was 5 minutes of leaving me alone for you to see the result. And it would
Mm-hmm.
have been beautiful for everybody.
Would have been a great moment for all of us. You would have gotten me to school like 10 minutes early. I would have felt good about myself. I would have came home and did my homework. But now, oh, that's out the window. Screw you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Just from that one core interaction for the day. And that's repeated itself endlessly throughout my adolescence and even sometimes into adulthood
Oh
because like
yeah.
your parents never stop being your parents. Like
Yep.
you will be an adult, but there's still going to be those moments where they tell you what to do. And
100%.
then and then you're like, "You know what? No." And they're like, "You've never grown." It's like you should know by now after how many years of raising me that this approach is the wrong one.
Yeah. But I think sometimes when you're a parent, you can't help it. Like you want to take care of your kid and you want to make sure that they're doing well. So you like you do things, you remind them because you like, I want to make sure my kid's okay. I want to make sure they're doing the right thing. But they forget what it was like to be that kid being told what to do. And I think there's like that disconnect for like when you're a parent long enough, you forget that that's what it was like and that's how you felt. Or you're like so used to like because your kid is born and you are telling them for so long up until they're probably like 16, how to behave, what to do, how to act. But then like past like that 14, 16 age, they want to be able to like be a little bit more responsible on their own. But parents sometimes like after that 14 to 16 years, they forget how to like start to let go. And I think that's like part of the issue.
Yes,
Mm.
and parents become their parents, and you become your parents. It's kind
Yeah.
of a trend
Oh yeah.
that exists as we have children. I don't have any children personally, but I have nephews and nieces, and they're all like at that like what's called the age of reason, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
they're at the point to where you don't really need to tell them what to do, but it's good to engage in a dialogue with them. So when I have the opportunity to sit down with them, and it's like, especially if they're like lashing out, I ask them like, well, why are you doing these things? And I'm not here to punish you. I just want to understand what your reasons are. And if we can have a discuss, like if I can understand what their mode of thinking is,
Mm-hmm.
then we might be able to figure out what the real issue is and maybe find a course of action and cooperation and living together that will facilitate a person who lives better for themselves and for others instead of resisting so hard. But yeah, that like one of the core things, like if you have a child, and my friends have children, and I kind of am
Oh,
a
so you
steward
do
of
have
them from
friends.
time to time. Uh, uh, yeah, you have kids?
Oh God, no. Yeah, no.
Oh, I was gonna say I thought I heard that, but um, I they of course they want to ensure that their kids live, that they're
Mm-hmm.
successful, that they're never in want of anything, but it also comes with like hovering around a lot. It's like being ever present. I'm like, it's like if you just give your kids a little bit of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
it will be beneficial for all of you. It's like they have to be able to learn to be disciplined on their own and to have freedom to move and to breathe. But because they want to protect their children, they always see their children as children. It's like constantly around, supervise them, like you're smothering them. That's
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of this lashing is like, well, they're not your kids. You don't know. I'm like, it doesn't necessarily mean what you say, but then it's like, then they get super emotional and then just turns into a fight and not an argument because there's a difference between fighting and arguing.
Mm-hmm.
Because an argument is a discussion. We're discussing subjects and
There's points
premises
to
and
the
getting to a
to the
conclusion. Yeah.
discussion. Yeah.
But a fight is just like, no, you're wrong. You don't know because,
Yeah.
you're X, Y, or Z. And it's never good.
Yeah. Um, I think I kind of got lucky, especially being from an Asian household. I had parents who were really good at having those open discussions. And especially when it came to like letting us have more freedom as we got older, letting go a little bit of responsibility. I think it's because my parents were both really, especially my dad grew up in a very like uh different situation. He was obviously like an immigrant child. Like him and his mom immigrated here when he was relatively young. He did most of it, like I think he was like 6 or 7, maybe like somewhere between 5 and 7, that age. Um, but it was him and a single mom. Neither of them like really spoke English, but his mom worked like 3 jobs, and as soon as he could work, he was working like 2 to 3 jobs, like just to get themselves through and stuff like that. And so he had a lot of freedom growing up because of the situation he's in, but he also had a lot of responsibility because of that to like be able to take care of him and his mom and like keep them going. So like when we were growing up, my dad was like really good about like giving us that freedom, but also giving us the responsibility that came with it and saying like, hey, you know, we're gonna let you do a few more things. We're gonna let you learn how to do this and or you know like, but you also then need to be able to like you know help out the family and be responsible for the things around you if you want to keep that freedom. So if like you want to be able to go out 2 3 days 3 days a week, you also need to come home and like be able to like you know take care of like a lot of the like chores or like you know you're gonna help me this weekend like you know build things for the house. Like we did a lot of gardening and stuff, but he taught me and my brother how to like build and all that type of stuff. Or you know a couple of nights a week maybe you cook dinner, so like now I'm going to teach you how to cook at a pretty young age because I want you guys helping out with that stuff. So like it was really good about like balancing that like that freedom and responsibility part. And I think that's the part that some parents have the problem with. Either they give too much freedom or sometimes too much responsibility, and one, you'll let the kid like do whatever and then they don't learn that discipline, and the other is they never learn the discipline because they're constantly being hounded by their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree that, there needs to be balance there. And that's why we have this idea of the age of reason, is that you kind of, no parents out there, especially like with their firstborn, are going to be expert parents. Like you're going into this new, you're green, you're a rookie, and your kid is new at humanity. Like they're a new human, and their experiences are completely novel, and everything that they do is going to be completely new to them. And that's every kid that you have. It's their experience is going to be novel. You may be better at parenting from the first child, and subsequently maybe a little bit better with the next, maybe a little bit better with the other one, but they're all going to be different experiences because they're all having something unique and novel occur within them. And you need to handle each one differently, but you need to find that balance, right? And that's what comes with the age of reason, is you test them, you teach them first and foremost, and you be present, and you give them the safety and security and the care. Like the care is important, because you can grow up safe and secure, but if your parents don't love you, there are issues there. Or you can be loved but not safe and secure, more issues. So you have to like find that balance, and then you have to find out the balance of like how much space is the proper amount of space. Because like, if like you said, like if they have too much freedom, then they just do whatever they want, and issues. If they have too much governance, then they lash out all the time because they're resisting authority and there's no peace. So it's like, how much freedom do they get? And you have to teach them like, okay, like about responsibility and about doing the right thing, and hopefully teaching them like, you understand that when I punish you, it's not because I don't like you. Like if I'm taking things away, it's because you understand that you were in contradiction of the rules that we agreed upon, and that this was the punishment. And as a person, if they can understand like, okay, like I understand my punishment, I'm angry, I understand, but I can accept my punishment. And then eventually everybody learns and they retool a system. And then, hopefully you find that you get a balanced individual out of it and you become a balanced parent from it. But it's a lot of things that people don't have. I feel like people don't have time for anymore either, is that it's like, we're in a society where it requires two parents to work a lot of the time. So the kids are being raised by their school and by their peers and by their daycares and by everything else but the parents in a lot of situations. Not the majority. I don't have the statistics. I can't speak to that, but I think like that's an issue, is that, kids are really, really left to their own devices, and parents are finding themselves less able to parent because of the demands of the world. It's like they gotta work. They both gotta work. Or like maybe they have an elderly parent like grandma or grandpa that they also have to take care of. So it's like, where do you have time to teach me how to be a proper human if you're not even here?
Yeah,
Like, that's
exactly.
an issue too.
I think we've seen this like a lot, like as someone who's in like criminology, like it's a lot of study of like why kids in low socioeconomic areas tend to do worse, and it's like often because the parents are so busy with work, and like each parent is either working two jobs, one parent's not in the picture. The parents are working like super long hours because the jobs that they do have require like super long hours, because sometimes low skill like labor or like certain jobs will require like super long hours, so like the kids are really left to their own devices, and you see how that can like lead to like really bad outcomes, at least for criminal engagement and stuff like that among like youth and minorities, or not minorities, minors and youth and stuff, right? And yeah, I think like that's become really hard because I'm a huge, obviously, like, I'm definitely a feminist and stuff, and I believe like women should be able to work and, shouldn't have to be the parent that takes off time. But I also think there's something to be said for like, I advocate for like both parents have leave after having a kid, which I know isn't a thing in the States apparently. UK, it's pretty good. In Canada, I know you can get pretty good maternal leave. I don't know about like for the fathers, it's a little bit harder, but I know a lot of companies do it, and I don't know about the States. I don't even think you guys get like federally. I don't think there has any like required maternal leave, right?
No, there's definitely maternity leave, and I think that there's it's like at a fraction of the pay that you
Mm.
receive while you're on leave. I don't know if there's paternity leave where it's like after the child is born that the father or the spouse, the other parent, can be the one who's like, okay, well, I'll stay at home because
Mm-hmm.
I think you touched on something very important. Just because a person can carry a child doesn't mean that they also have to be the one that's primarily at home and
Yeah.
raising them and rearing them. And I have an example in my family where like I have a set of cousins. Well, I have a cousin who's been married to her husband for like at least a decade now. They've been high school sweethearts. She's a nurse. She works long hours. He works locally. Very
Mm-hmm.
hands-on dad, but their situation works really well. Like they both work, but he tends to be the one that's a lot more locally available, but he embraces it. He likes
Mm-hmm.
being a hands-on dad. He likes being the one who is accessible, who's there, able to like if the roles were reversed, and these are things that they've done by choice, like they've agreed on these as a family unit. Like
Yeah.
if it was the old school way, like he would be missing out on so much of his kids' lives. And for old rules that just say because she's a woman, she needs to be the one that stays at home, she's giving up her ability to work. They're
Mm-hmm.
suddenly not such a great position because now he's working double shifts to provide for the family. She's always home. He doesn't get to spend time with the kids. The kids are growing up with an ad. Like there are all sorts of negative things that happen. So like
Yeah.
if people can agree, like, oh, like, like I have friends who are like, oh, I don't mind being a stay-at-home dad. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's my wife is in a position where she makes good money. Like this is to paraphrase from those individuals. Like my wife makes good money. I can stay at home and I can be the primary like educator and caregiver for our child. She's not absent in the situation because it just happens to work. But like I don't mind this, and society still looks as like, oh, like you're a guy who stays home and takes, what are you, a woman? Like
Yeah.
that view is still prevalent. It's like, well, if it's their choice, they love their child, and this is just what works, then why not facilitate it? Why not make it possible
Yeah.
for either parent to stay home if they so desire, and not say like, oh, because your chromosomes are different, like you can't go
Mm-hmm.
and pursue a life outside of the home. That's ridiculous.
Because yeah, I think it's so important to like figure that out within your family, especially I think even like especially for people like if you're planning to get married and have kids, figure these things out before you make any of those big steps. Is like my big piece of advice. If you're dating someone and you're planning like to have marriage and you're planning to have kids and that's what you want, figure out all the like big details that I think a lot of people miss before they get married. Because like if you're a woman and you want to not want to be the parent that stays home, you better hope that your husband knows that before you have a kid. But yeah, I think like the thing is like people are super judgmental about new things, and like the idea of like the dad being the one to stay home is still fairly new, that people look at it weird. But I think it's like that whole thing of like taking one extra second to like question and think about things and being like, well, if it works for their family and he's a good dad and it's happy and they're doing well and the kids are good, then like why should it matter like which parent stays home? It should be like what's best for the kids and what's best for their family and what works well for them, rather than just being like, well, that's not how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to the circular reasoning. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, you're the man. you're supposed to be the breadwinner. She's the woman. She's supposed to be staying at home and raising
Yeah.
the kids. And just because that's the way that they think it should be doesn't mean that's the way that it is and that it ought to be. Like there's like should versus ought, and
Yeah.
and again, it's like who's the best person for the job, and that's something that they have to discuss like together, right? It's like if you get as a person into a relationship, like if I got into a relationship where I was with someone who's like, well, I would like to have kids, and then if we agreed on that, but she was also like, I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. Like that's not me. It's not how I've and we agreed to like, okay, like, all right, we'll have this discussion. And if this isn't what you want, like clearly this is going to be detrimental to our children. That you're going to like be resenting your position if you're forced into it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it works better for me to be the one that's at home more often and be present and like prepare meals and blah blah blah. Like it's not bad for a man to know how to cook. It's not bad for a man to know how to sew. Like
Mm-hmm.
you might need to stitch yourself up someday, but like you can put masculine spins on things like to make people think about it. But
Look,
like
man, you're about to go
it's
to work. Your button falls off your pants. You need to know how to sew that shit back on. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
right. Because you can't just be like, honey, I have a problem here, fix
Yeah.
it. Like it's good to be self-sufficient, not just for yourself, but for the people around you as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and if we come to that agreement, be like, okay, like, cool. And if she's also like making way more than me, I'm not going to be like, yeah, quit your job and let's live in poverty so I can be a man. Like, that's terrible reasoning. We're going to be in a way worse situation unless versus the other way where it's like you're the primary breadwinner. I'm here, and our unit works. Like we're happier. Like of course we fight. We don't always get along because we're
Yeah.
human and we have differences. But like this works for us, and we're happy more often than not. And our kids like not in jail, not like out there breaking the law all the time. Like they recognize that their situation is a positive situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this is something that's like going to be good for us and good for everybody else because of it. Like our kids not going to be out there terror, stealing cars, vandalizing. Like it's good for everybody to be able to accept this. But people are like, no, man, you're a man, you're the breadwinner,
Yeah.
you support the family, and she just stayed. And it doesn't. We see that it doesn't work, but
Yeah.
we still adhere to it because that's like the tradition.
Yeah.
And just because something's a tradition doesn't mean that it's right.
Yeah, I think that's like a huge, and especially like, I think as women, or like at least for me as a woman, like I've thought about this so much, and like I know I don't want to have like biological kids. Like I don't want to go through the process of having a baby and doing the 9 months of pregnancy and like then have to push something out of me that I have felt like that for years, and I feel like I will feel like that for years. That's not something I ever want to do. So when I am in a relationship, I like, that is something that I have to make like really clear, especially if it's like something like for like a serious relationship. I would always make that super clear to my partner, because it's like that's something that like could be a make or break for a relationship. If they really want biological kids, then like that's something that could be a make or break, right? And similarly for like child rearing, like I don't know if like depending on what I'm doing, if I'm really attached to my job, I'm someone who's definitely going to be very attached to my job. I like working, I love doing it, and if I love what I'm doing, I'm not going to want to give it up. If that person isn't okay also taking time off to like take care of kids, if we had them, like if we were to adopt or whatever, then again that would also be like a make or break for me, saying like, okay, well I need someone who's going to be like an equal in this. Like maybe we both take, you take 2 days a week, I'll take 3 days a week or whatever, like however we figure it out. But like this needs to be like a compromise, and this can't be just something, well, no, like it's intuitive, like you would go, you would stay home and I would go back to work, like what the hell, like I can't have that.
Yeah, and that's you touched down on a couple of important things. So it's like you get into a relationship and someone says, oh, we're in love, but at the same time I'd really like to have biological children.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're like, I don't want that, but you end up following through with the relationship anyway, then there's that built-in resentment where I was gonna be like, you know what,
Yeah.
yeah, we should have kids. And then if you get into the situation where you end up like with a biological child and you're like, and you still feel the same way, now you have this like resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And now like your like basically your views and how you wanted to live your life were completely ignored. And I think that as a person in general, having your views and your life ignored, just that's not a good thing. Like it's not going to produce a positive situation where now you're kind of giving up what your life is.
Yeah.
and involuntarily, because you already knew that this was going to be an issue but still allowed it to take place. And like that's one thing I think that we fail as people to really understand is like when we see an irresolvable problem and the best thing to do is to walk away from it and maybe find someone else who's more compatible. Like we just fail to. We're like, no, we're like already in it this deep. We use that sunk fallacy cost. Like we've already put this much time into each other. We already love each other, so we should just stick it out until the end. And that
Yeah.
creates a lot of toxic situations. And a lot of people abide to it, like abide by it. And then like the kids end up being like, yeah, my mom or my dad really hated me. Like they just every time I was with them, they just resented me, said I didn't want you. And it's like then they grow up like those complexes because they were brought into a situation that was never conducive to their upbringing in the first place, when all it had to take was like, yeah, you're going to be emotionally hurt and distraught for a while, because no one likes breakups, right? Like I've never
Yeah.
met someone who's been like, yeah, I love breaking up. I
I
love
love
falling in
breaking
love with
hearts. I go
people.
around doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love having my heart broken. Oh man, it's just nothing better in the world is being in love and then suddenly just being plummeted right to the bottom of it, like of that feeling of despair.
Oh, you should
Like,
talk to my friend Rams then. He wants to get into a relationship and break up just so he can listen to a Frank Ocean. Yeah, there he is, Ramney. All right, this kid wants to get into a breakup just so he can listen to a Frank Ocean album, just to have the full experience of listening to the album.
yeah, but I mean, like, they exist. Typically the outlier, right? Like they're the dot, like on the histogram, like they're the dot that's like
Yeah.
way out
Oh
in
yeah.
the periphery somewhere. But like they're there, they're to be represented, and there's nothing wrong with that if you know you derive some sort of enjoyment in life, because we have a solo life experience. We don't know for certain if we're going to be able to have something after this, if we're
Yeah.
going to come back as something else, or if this is like just the one shot that we like. There's a world of infinite possibilities. And you know, it says the things we do for art, and if that's an artistic expression, artistic experience, like that's something that's subjective, right? That's part of being human, part of your own life that you're experiencing. But like, it's if you're in like, and if you're imprisoned by it, right? And it's
Yeah.
kind of what happens in a lot of situations, that people become prisoners to their fates,
Yeah.
like that end up knowing that like it was probably better off going into a different situation, or maybe not making this because we're emotional, rational, et cetera, et cetera. But like we recognize a lot of the time when something's bad for us, but we still do it anyway, because a
Yeah.
lot of the times it's like sunk cost fallacy, or we don't
Yeah.
want to be alone, or we don't want to experience sadness. Or just like I would never like be like, yeah, I wish that you were sad, and then if you were going, I wish that you were depressed or just like in extreme despair. Like that's not something I would wish on somebody. People experience it. I hope that they have means to overcome it or to mitigate it. Like as a person, I hope that they can live a good life and
Yeah. Of
find ways
course.
to deal with those very difficult life situations. But like it's when you have people who are going against the grain of what they are and who they are meant to be, it's not good for themselves, and it radiates out like whatever that negativity is. It's not concentrated to that location. It spills out into the world around you, whether you're aware of it or not. And I think that it's something like having these talks brings it to the forefront, right? It's like once you're no longer ignorant of it, you can't claim ignorance as an excuse.
Yeah. I think I think we've all heard the saying like we're blinded by love, but I also think there should be a saying like we're imprisoned by time. And so many people, especially when it comes to relationships, like you were saying earlier, is like that sunk fallacy. Like people, like the sunk cost thing. People feel like once they've put in, like they love this person so much that they don't want to leave them, but they also feel like I put in so much time into this, I can't do this again. Like I don't want to go through another 2 3 year relationship just to get, because like they're like a lot of people like I think this is our problem with like the modern setup is people feel like they're on a timeline. Like I have to finish high school, you know, get my higher education, get my job, get into a relationship, get married, have kids. Like people are so ingrained on that timeline, and they feel like they have to do it by a certain point. That like if you're, let's say you've been in a relationship, you got into a relationship when you were 23, now you're 26, you've been with this person, but all of a sudden things feel like they're not going to turn out great, but you'll push that feeling aside because you're like, I'm 26, I can't do another 3 year relationship, I'm going to be almost 30, and then I'm going to be too old to have kids, or you know, I don't want to be old. Like this whole thing of people feel like they're put like on such a timeline, and they feel like almost imprisoned by that timeline, that they can't make better decisions because they're scared it's going to screw up that this like plan that's laid out. And I think that's like a huge issue of like, and I think so many people ignore like hard conversations because of that too. Is like, again, like same with careers. Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people have that hello pixie kinky, but people feel like if they I went through it, obviously, like not with a relationship, but like in terms of my university, I did 2.5 years of a chemistry degree, realized how unhappy I was terrified to change. And thank God I have like super supportive parents who are like, you are not happy doing this. You don't want to do this for the rest of your life. Switch degrees. And so I switched degrees after 2.5 years, almost 3 years of a fucking chem degree, right? And I still switched, and I'm so much happier for it, and I'm better off for it. But that is not an easy decision because, like, that's going to set back my timeline a couple years because it's going to take me like a year to 2 years extra to finish my degree now and get out of university and get a job. But it was the right decision. But I think a lot of people, even I had a hard time making that decision despite knowing how good it would be for me. It was really hard to make that decision because I was terrified that, like, oh my God, it's going to take 2 years longer. But then my parents sat me down and they're like, so what if it takes 2 years longer? Then what? Then you'll get your job and you'll be working there 2 less years than you would have been in the grand scheme of like your 80-year life. Like, is that really like something you want to like take the risk on? Like, or like you want to like continue being super sad doing the degree you're doing and maybe not get the dream job you want and go into something that you don't want to do because that's what you got the degree for. And I was like, that's a really good point. And so I think that's like, you know, applies to all areas of life, like whether it be like schooling, career, or relationships, like that feeling of imprisonment by like the time we have, I think is super scary to people.
Yeah, and I mean that's our primary fear, right? And that's going back to the original topic of like religion and how we have this idea of afterlife is because we understand and our ancestors understood we are very finite beings. We have a very limited time, and luckily, thanks to like advances in medicine and technology and yada yada, like we can now live typically about anywhere from 70 to 100-ish years. Thanks to all of the advances in modern technology and what have you. So we have more time, a little bit more time to really consider our lives and follow through. But the thing is you do end up in situations, and thankfully for you, your parents were open to the idea of and also encouraging of the idea for you to really think it through and make the choice for yourself if you want to switch. And that it wasn't an easy decision for you, I think speaks to the importance of the matter, is that you really had to consider it carefully.
Yeah.
Because there are people in your situation where their parents will be like, no, you've declared your major, you're already 2 years in, I'm not gonna like, and especially if they're like paying for it, they'll be like, I'm not paying for 2 more years of you being in college. You've already committed, you're gonna follow through with it, and that's just what adults do. And then we're getting back to the circular reasoning, right? Is that like this is what adults do, and you're going to follow through because you're an adult. And it's like, well, that doesn't, like, okay, that, like, we're not exploring greater reasons here.
Yeah.
We're just saying that because I'm an adult, I've made a decision, I have to commit to it because that's what adults do. It's like, oh, that doesn't help me any. So would you rather me just be a miserable adult for the rest of my life and always think about like what could have been instead, or if I would have been happier otherwise, when I know right now through careful thought and consideration that this is going to make me unhappy, and maybe my next path isn't going to make me the happiest, but I know for sure that I'll be a happier person than if I followed through with my previous path, and that you are allowed that freedom, right? That they encourage that type of freedom for you. I think it's something like that's really difficult for parents too, because they can see like, you know what, a chemistry degree actually would be better for you because it'll 100%. Get you a professional career and this, that, or the other. You'll make money, but like, who cares if I have all the money in the world if I'm miserable?
That was like the big thing, because my parents were like, my dad's a like a metallurgical engineer, so like really scientific. My mom's a teacher, so like two pretty good professions. And my mom's like worked her way up and like is like pretty high level. She's even a principal now, right? Like, so she's worked really hard. My parents have both been lucky to be really educated. And the thing was, like, they wanted the best for us, which is why they, like, my parents would have been okay with us not going to university, but they wanted us to go to university to open up our options in the future. And they're like, if you have a degree on your resume, it does open up opportunities. Like, whether or not, like, you need the degree for the opportunity, it will open up opportunities regardless, right? And so they wanted us to, like, get the education. They also said, they're like, university is a good experience for learning and growing and, like, becoming a responsible adult. So I think it's also important for that reason. But again, it was also like a really, like, I was so lucky that my parents were so open about everything. And it did also come from a little bit of a place of privilege. Like, my parents are financially stable enough that if I switched degrees, like, it wasn't going to break the bank with that extra few semesters that I need, right? And so there was a lot of factors that went in there. But, like, I have a lot of pieces that came in before that decision came in. So like if I was in a different circumstance, I might have been the same kid who might have made like the unhappy choice to go into a chem degree and wanted to switch, but in another situation like with parents who maybe weren't so educated or like weren't so financially stable, they might have not been as accepting of their kid like making that choice. So like I obviously do remember that I'm in a particular situation where I'm lucky enough to be able to make those choices, but I think it is important for people to like also question their decisions, especially when it comes to stuff like that's so big in your life, like relationships and careers and schooling.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And the important topic of like careers that Pixie mentioned. If I may shout out Pixie for a moment, she's actually a mod in my channel, really close
Oh,
friend of mine that I've met through Final Fantasy 14, the
very nice.
award winning what is it, the critically acclaimed MMORPG. I'm not going to go into the whole spiel of the meme,
In
but
that case, thank you for
anyway,
joining us.
yeah. But she's one of the people that I sound off a lot of my thoughts to, that helps keep me in check because I recognize that I have like I joke and I always say like, oh, I have like a handful of brain cells, but I recognize that I have the ability to think about things in a different way, and sometimes I may allow my pride and my arrogance to incorrectly inform me that
Hmm.
I'm right about something.
Oh yeah.
But when my friends have the ability and the courage, by being true friends, to be able to correct me and be like, actually, not so much. Let's take it. Let's re-examine that, and then I
Yeah.
come away like, oh, like actually, I wasn't right. And
Oh yeah.
thank you for bringing that to my attention. Like that's the type of friend that she is, and I value her for it. But like, yeah, like we have position like people don't have the ability to switch. They might not be
Hmm.
in situations where they can carefully examine or have the ability to sound off with their parents. Like they can't make informed choices because they aren't given the ability to actually take the time to think it through or make the change. And I think like when we discuss things about politics and society and about religion is that like ideally we should live in a world where we have the freedom to be able to think about like how we live our life carefully and make informed choices about
Hmm.
um, how we're going to conduct who we are as human beings and what we're going to do, and not just be like, oh, I'm human. What makes me happy is just doing what I want all the time, whenever I want, without any repercussion. I don't agree with that. But
Hmm.
being able to really carefully think about things and having an environment that taught you how to think carefully is
Yeah.
important. I don't think we have a lot. I think we have environments that teach you how to answer questions, but not how to think, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
also problematic.
Oh, for sure. Especially having like my mom, not only my mom, but a lot of people in my family, like in the education system, it is so much of that like teaching you what to think and not how to think. And she's like, she always has that biggest problem. And she's like, she was a kindergarten teacher, and she's like, from the age of 5, she's like, I want to teach my kids how to think and not what to think, because she feels like so much of like schooling and education, especially like right now, is like we teach our kids, this is what you think, and obviously it's not that direct, but like there is a lot of that. Like I feel like questioning is becoming harder and harder, and this even goes back to like our politics conversation earlier. Like people are so bought into their sides that they can't think about anything else without feeling uncomfortable about it. And like now we've like created a lot of echo chambers, especially in online spaces, of like people will only surround themselves with their similar opinions and people who agree with them. And I think that's such an issue of like people will like they don't want to hear any other perspective. They don't want to listen to anything else. Like they just want to like, this is their view, this is where they are, and then that's all that can exist. And it creates like such an unhealthy like relationship with I think the world and society at large, because you forget all the other people who do exist and all the other opinions that do exist. And I think this is even like people were so shocked that it was such a slim margin between like, sorry, this is going into like kind of like a bigger picture thing. People are so shocked about the like split between Biden and Trump when it happened. They're like, how did it like, there's no way the vote should have been that close and stuff like that. Like I can't believe they got, it's like you forget that half of your country actually is still conservative and like traditionalist, but you've just surrounded yourself with such a big echo chamber online that you could not believe that this could happen, right? Pixie said, luckily it's starting to shift towards inquiry, but it's a slow process. Yeah, for sure. I think
Yeah.
I think if you're talking about the education system, they are slowly trying to get back to that like inquiry based learning.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? And that's that's part of the beauty and the danger of it is that like we talk about like the ideals of Greek philosophy. And for me, I'm very Socratic, right? I
Mm-hmm.
discussed that in the beginning, and that's inquiry, right? But when you inquire too much, it becomes dangerous because you don't want people questioning everything, right? Because then they might not listen to what you have to say. But it's not a bad thing because we don't know everything about the world. The universe is vast. We don't even know everything about what's beneath the waters and the ground that
Mm-hmm.
of the planet that we live on. We have to question. It's important to question. And it's like one of my favorite things is like people are like that like why do they teach math in school? I hate math. I'm never going to use algebra or trigonometry in the real world. And it's like really think about why they're teaching it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just like they're not teaching you this just so you know how to add numbers together or create sums and do spreadsheets or whatever. It's they're actually giving you this complex idea because it's abstract, and they're giving you a formula that shows that if you follow these steps, you have a problem and there's a clear solution, but you have to think about it. And
Mm-hmm.
even when you get to that solution, part of the question is like, did I do it right? And there are even unsolvable questions out there that that exist, mathematical problems that are conundrums, and people haven't solved them yet because you have to think outside. You have to inquire. Like, well, clearly we've got this far by thinking about it in this way, but we're missing a piece here that we have to think about it in a novel and new and in a novel. Try not to use way twice, but this is what it is. Like we have to think about it in a novel way, and that creativity, that embracing of the creativity, of the ability to question, that's what brings about the new solutions and the advances. I mean, like part of what happened with the Industrial Revolution and the advances in modern society is that they poured a lot of resources into embracing creativity and ingenuity and education, and not just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, learn STEM because science is important, math is important, is because it expands the way that you think. And you might
Yeah.
not be mathematically inclined, but the lesson from the reasoning is what makes you think about other things creatively and create solutions for problems that might exist in other realms. But that's just me going off on a tangent.
No, absolutely. I actually really like that example because I think, like, yeah, math is such a huge thing, but like people hate, and it's like, well, why do I need to like learn trigonometry? Like, when am I ever gonna know this? But it's like, I think it's really important for people to like. I took up to calculus 3 when I was doing my chem degree. Holy shit, that shit was hard. But I appreciate the fact that I think it got me like doing the 2 years of the chem degree got me really good at like logic, reasoning, figuring out problems like that, like that problem solving skills that you learn through like sometimes like logic based like or like STEM fields and stuff like that is very different than the problem solving you'll do in like an ethics or an English class. Like an English class, like you're diving into like stories and morality and all this type of stuff. But in like a math class, you're gonna figure out how to like make steps to solve a problem, and like that's gonna apply to every part of your life where you're gonna have a problem in front of you and you need to plan out steps of how are you gonna solve this. And I think that's like really like people don't understand how like different parts of our brain interact. Like you might think that like my brain does math when it does math, but like your brain is going to bring up how it solved problems when you're in other situations in life and not necessarily just math situations. Like you're going to like get into like maybe a complex problem at work. Well, now you're going to know how to figure out like how to your brain is going to turn on that part of it that like problem solves and like reasons out and logics out and makes your steps and planning the same way it did in like a math class or like in a science class or something. So I like that.
Yeah,
I like that example a lot. Everyone is a math
yeah,
person, like it or not.
yes, and I mean that's
Uh,
true because oh, go ahead.
oh, Astro Pineapple, thank you for the follow. Sorry, I was just gonna say like, yeah, no, I don't know if everyone's a math person. I promise you. I took up to Calc 3, and I still don't think I'm a math person.
But I do agree with that. Like with mathematics and even with science, with the scientific method, it's a process of inquiry, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's there are steps involved, and that's what the core of the lesson is that if you set out the steps, there is a solution. It might take you a while to resolve the problem or
Mm-hmm.
to find that solution, but if you have a really deep understanding of what it means to be like, okay, I have a problem here, and we're going to make a plan to see how we can resolve it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be mathematic, but the problem solving and the reasoning associated and the logical processes associated with it are important.
Mm-hmm.
And those, I think that those are the core things, is like being able to be critical about it. And when I mean critical, I mean like just being able to examine it. When people are like you're being critical, you're such a critic. Like, it's not because I think I'm better than you, like not me specifically, but like, is that being said as a generality, it's actually good to think critically, because
Mm-hmm.
you should question what things are, and maybe what is being said is factually correct, and that, like, whatever the premises are, lead to the conclusion logically and soundly. But how do you know unless you examine it?
Yeah.
And you have to examine it, but you also have to know how to examine it, and there are steps in that process, and that's what the education in the STEM fields do. But it's like, but you also have to be creative, which is why I also deeply
Mm-hmm.
appreciate and embrace the arts, is because that's the creative part of the thinking. It's not just the hard, scientific, logical, cold reasoning. It is the warm, creative, beautiful part of the mind that, when you meld those things together, produces these wonderful archaeological, artistic expressions that we see, that we've managed to create with our own hands as a human species. And that's from embracing these things, not from stifling them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think like people sometimes get really hung up on like, well, this is like, okay, you did sociology, right? You said your major was sociology.
Yes.
Did you have to take any psychology classes?
I did not have to take them, but it was encouraged, and part of my background included reading Freud, because he's
Yeah.
considered a very important leading figure in sociological thought,
Yeah.
also in psych, of course. But he was a figure that we had to take note of, because of the
Okay.
way that he approached the way that our minds work as individuals and as a collective.
Yeah.
So that's just, my explanation there. So go ahead and follow up.
Um, yeah, so I don't know how, I guess this is kind of a newer concept and I don't know when you went to university. However, there's this idea of like neuroplasticity, which is relatively new, and it's the idea that our brain can continue to learn and change even as we grow, because what they used to think is that your brain stopped learning, or your brain stopped growing and changing at a certain point in your life. But what they found recently is that you're actually able to continue to like have your neurons change, and you're like you can have like more connections in your brain continue to like create throughout your life past the point when they thought you could. And I think it's the idea of like people don't understand how our brain not only interacts in that sense of like learning, but also like this whole idea of like the left brain right brain thing of like, oh well, I'm just really left brain dominated. No, actually, because like a lot of our left brain stuff, like it's so interconnected that you actually can't be like this whole idea of like I'm very logical or I'm very creative. Like those two ideas meld so much. So, like when we talk about problem solving, like yeah, you might get like your stem side, like, or your like left brain, like your really logical side. You know how to plan out and solve a problem. However, your right brain or your like more creative brain is going to come into play when if you start solving a problem and you hit a block, and all of a sudden you can't solve that problem any further through the steps that you thought you could. Now you need to get creative and figure out how you're going to continue to solve that problem, or how you're going to get around this block, right? And I think like this whole idea of like neuroplasticity and learning and experiences, like teaching us how to like do those things, and how like not only your left brain working on its own or your right brain working on its own, but how these things like interconnect, and how like even in situations where you think like, oh well, this is like only for creative people, or this is only for like these type of people, like it's not necessarily true. And I think like thank God psychology's get like, or not psychology, but like science and psychology in general, like that narrative starting to go away of like, oh well, they're just left brain, like this person's just really creative but they're not so good at this. And it's like, well, like all of these things interconnect. Like I don't think anyone's necessarily like one thing. I think people just need to learn in their own ways. I think there's people who are probably more apt to like learn certain things than others. That's always going to be true. Like we're all like, genetically like, prepped for a little bit of a different experience, or like, being better at certain things. But I think this idea of like, oh well, I'm not good at anything logical because like I'm just, that's not who I am. I think everyone can like learn these things and like, apply their own sense of like learning and being to different aspects of their life. It was
Yeah,
a really
yeah.
long-winded way to say all that.
No, and I agree with that too, because I think that naturally as people, even if you start at something late in life, the more that you practice it, the more that you study it, the more diligent you are with it, the better you
Mm-hmm.
are going to become at that thing. And yes, there are people out there who are more naturally inclined to the arts and the sciences or to practical ways of life, and they're just more adept. But there's that one saying, right? That's like hard work, talent loses to hard work when talent doesn't work hard. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that rings true, right? Like someone can be like naturally good at something, but they find like, oh, they're not actually as good as they thought they were because there's someone else who wasn't as adept or naturally inclined to it, but they decided, you know what, I really like this thing though, and I'm gonna keep at this. I'm gonna keep hammering away at this one thing because I really love it and I'm not naturally good at it. But they've put so much time into it that they develop a mastery over it, and it may take them longer, but it's something that they learn to develop and to overcome and to embrace and make their own. And sometimes they become leading lights in those fields and in those
Mm-hmm.
designs and in those interests and endeavors. Like that's one thing that does ring true, and I think that's something that needs to be embraced. Is just because you may not be naturally inclined to it, if you're interested in it, then there should be some sort of way for you to be able to pursue it. And even if you don't end up the best, you might still end up good at it just by dedicating your life to it if that's what you really want to do. And there shouldn't be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like, you're not, you're not good at math, so you should just never do math. And I have a relative that I grew up with. He's like a brother to me, and throughout our childhood just wasn't good at math. Like definitively says like, I just don't get it, man. I just don't get it. And then he got into computers. And when he was in his like his coding class, it finally clicked. Like
Yeah.
everything that was computers and coding, I had like his comp lab teacher basically broke it. He's like, dude, this is mathematics. It's like you understand math, you just weren't understanding it in a language that
Mm-hmm.
was coming to you in a
Oh
way to
yeah.
convey these concepts. And once he got that, suddenly everything turned like the gears clicked over. Everything started making sense. He's like, I knew this stuff the whole time. It just wasn't being it wasn't being delivered to me in a way that I could comprehend it. And
Yeah.
once he got there, it's just like became a genius like at the art, and not just like like partially a natural genius with computation, but also that he worked really hard at it. And it's like just like,
Mm-hmm.
dude, you finally got it. And he's always been like, oh, you're so smart. Like I'll never be as smart as you. Blah blah blah. Like it's like, oh, I appreciate you waxing me off, dude. It's like I really respect you because you do so many things that are beyond my wheelhouse, and the only way that I can even come close is if I put like an immense amount of time into this project, but I'd have to have like be into it. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can't just do this because I'm not like interested in the way that you are. You're always going to be better at me for that. But like you don't understand like how amazing you actually are. And I think that's part of what makes us better too, is like artists, um, people that are creative, whether it's with writing or anything that they design. Like even myself, when I produce works that people consider to be good,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's trash. That's absolutely garbage. I don't know why you like it. But that's that part of the self-deprecation is what pushes me to always like try better, to do more, to learn something else, to continue to hone my craft, because I don't ever want to be at the point to where I just look at something that I've made. And I writing and speaking are the two things that I am naturally inclined to, but
Mm-hmm.
I never want to get to the point in my life where like I look at something that I've made, I'm like, yeah, right on, got it right the first time, happy with it. I'm going to leave it and I'm never going to come back to it because I'm not going to grow if I have that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's necessarily healthy to say like I suck or my work sucks, but like
Yeah.
being critical of your own work and acknowledging like you're never going to reach perfection, but you can
Yeah.
work towards it for the
Knowing
entirety of your
where you
life
need
is
to grow
important.
is, I think, the important thing there. And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize about themselves is like how they can, like, going back to your friend and like kind of something Pixie said earlier about the inquiry based learning, is this whole idea of like we don't need to understand like how to teach kids, but we need to understand how to teach each individual kid, because so many kids learn in different ways that a lot of people get frustrated with their education because they think they're stupid. But it's not that they're necessarily stupid, it's that they're not being taught in a way that they can understand. And so my friend, and people I don't think realize how much they can do for themselves. And it really, it's sad because I think we all get frustrated and we know that feeling of like giving up and being like, I just suck at this. I'm gonna like do whatever I can to get through it and that's it. Like that's the bare minimum. But like people don't realize how much I think like control they can have over their own situation. And it's not easy. I'm not saying this is like an easy fix by any means. But like people who like come to learn that they can like take hold of a situation and, you know, have that personal growth. And I like it kind of similar to your friend's story. I had a friend who from the time that I knew her, for God's sake, she was so bad at math. It was hilarious. Like she would say things that I'm like, oh my God. I remember teaching her in middle school. I was tutoring her through our math class because I was really good at math and she sucked at it. And she was trying to figure out 100 divided by 2 and she could not figure it out. And so I turned to her and I was like, Maria, what is 50 times 2? And she's like, 100. And I was like, so what's 100 divided by 2? And she like almost broke down crying because she's like, I don't know. And it was so funny. So ever since the time I knew her, she was really bad at math. And then she got into high school and she was still pretty bad at math. She was like getting through with like, I think C's and stuff. And then she had something she had to work towards. She really wanted to get into our university here. And she knew she needed to bring that math grade up to be able to get in. So she worked her ass off. She learned, she found different ways to study. She found new ways to learn math. And she passed that class with a B plus. And that was like unheard of for this kid. There was no way in my lifetime I ever thought I would see her get like even a B. Maybe even a, like, I didn't think she'd ever pass a C plus in math, but she worked her ass off and she like found other ways to learn and she learned what she needed to learn because she had that goal. And like, it was amazing. Like, it was like you saw how much someone like on their own could accomplish just by like putting in like that effort. And again, like it's not an easy thing. And it's like, it's not something that like, I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, you just need to like, I don't like that whole idea of like the bootstraps, you know, like pick yourself up by his bootstraps. But there is some level of like, you need to put in that effort and motivation into yourself. And I think having something that you're motivated towards, like for her, it was university, finding that goal that you are working towards and like putting that as a reason to like work harder and do more is like so important. I think can like be so important, or like not important, but like so it can help people a lot with that personal growth in a way I think people never think that they can. Like it you suddenly are able to do things that you never thought you would be able to.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what's amazing about, you know, the way that we are as people and how we think.
Sorry, I just gotta follow. I really hope I've gotten like 2 like crazy like follow raids from like bots, and so I'm like terrified every time I see a follower thing pop up. It scares me
Yeah,
because I always think it's gonna be like a raid.
there's a resource if you don't have it already that I'll share with you in Discord, that will help you identify what followers are potentially bots or which ones aren't, if you don't know about it. But I'll share that with you in confidence.
Thank you.
And if you already know about it or not, we'll find out. But one of the things too that's important too is that you mentioned is that we have a system that's kind of like a cookie cutter approach, right? Like they hope that it sticks to all the people who are learning.
I'm in fact not a bot. Oh, thank God. Well, welcome, Gooch Pocket.
Nice. Well, welcome in, not a bot. But we also don't, unless it's like we have the constriction of time and resources too, because there are a lot of situations where we have like one teacher and maybe 30 or 40 or 50 kids in a classroom. And it's like, how are you going to be able to give individual meal plans, learning plans to all of these students and really sit down and be able, like, if they're having problems, really dedicate a lot of time to them when your time is already so finite. It's like that's part of where there needs to be more resources. There needs to be not just like tutoring facilities and peer tutoring, which is important. Those need to exist, but being able to give educators resources to have, like how daycares, like there's like one adult per X amount of children, and there can't be any less than that amount. So like with educators, they need to be able to have assistants who are like they do at college, right? Where they have the students who are either going to master's or PhD, but are also there to be like their graders and to have the supplementary seminars and teach you about like the subject that you're learning. So you can be like, okay, well, like I'm a teacher. these are my 3 or 4 assistants. So if there's something that you're not understanding for, you're assigned to this group, A, B, C, or D, and then you have the time, you have office hours to be able to speak with them, and they have an understanding of this topic, and they will be able to help you. And if you're not getting it, maybe they can assist in ways that you'll be able to understand. And then I'm also here too, and now there's more time. There's more time for everybody, not just for the students, but for the educators, and more time to be able to really talk about a subject and get people to at least understand the core tenets of whatever is that's being taught.
Oh, sorry to answer Gooch Pocket's question. We're just talking more about like policy and education and stuff. We were talking about a little bit of like life planning and how like people like shouldn't be so constrained by their timelines, but also it just went into a lot of like education and like how we approach education with kids. And what I was going to say to your point, Sin, was yeah, I think this is why it's so important. Like, there's two things I kind of want to attach onto this. Oh, and thanks for the follow, Castigator. One is like, I think this is like the whole importance of teaching kids how to learn and not necessarily what to learn. It's like, if we can teach kids how to learn, then even if they're struggling, they might now have the resources to be able to like go and do that extra little bit of work to like, obviously not like young age, but like if you're in high school, if a kid knows how to learn, they'll go find the resources that help them find new methods to like learn. Like, so if they're struggling with this topic, they have the resources to be able to like find new ways to approach this topic. And I think that's a super important thing that kids need to learn. Is like not just, you know, reading out a textbook, this is what I need to know. It's like, how do I read this and digest information in a way that makes it into my brain and makes me actually learn the information and not just memorize or know the information, right? So that's one thing. And, you know, for a more real, like to go to your thing of like, we need more resources. So up here where I am, in my district, so my mom's a teacher, we had our government 6-7 years back now. The teachers were in talks of wanting a new contract with the government, and their big thing was called class size and composition. People thought that they just wanted more, teachers wanted more money. It was not that at all. I was super pissed when people kept saying that. What teachers wanted was like, we want a certain class size like limit and composition of that class. Like, you can only have so many kids with like certain designations, so that teachers do not get overwhelmed. We need like limits of like 20 students per class, and we need like, if you have X amount of like, you know, students who need like designations, who have like educational assistance, like if like, you know, a kid has like autism or ADHD, like kids who need like extra supports, you can only have so many of those kids in each class so that the teacher doesn't get overwhelmed. And if they have like a certain amount, they need a certain amount of assistance. That was the big thing they wanted in the contract. And the government basically, like when they even heard talks of the teachers wanting this, took the contract and like ripped it up, and they're like, okay, you don't have a contract anymore, sucks to suck, and we're going to do what we want. So the teachers went on strike, and they eventually did get it back. But it was so important to teachers that they had that ability to be able to work closer with students, that they were like, the big thing we want on this contract is we need to be able to have smaller classes and classes that we can work with and manage in a way that allows us to engage with these students in a good way. Because if you have too many kids, you can't have that same engagement with each kid. Like if you have 20 kids versus 30 kids, the difference is crazy at what level that like kid gets engagement with the teacher, right? And so I think that was like that whole idea of like having the extra resources. Like, we need enough educational assistance. We need like class sizes that are smaller so that, you know, teachers had the ability to work one-on-one with kids with enough time in the day, right? So I think those are like super important, like just to like add on to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, it's for the betterment of all if we are able to invest more into our educational system. And I do agree, educators in the US too, like definitely should be paid more. It's not the most glamorously paid job for you to retire well as a primary educator. It takes so long.
In Canada, it's like, if you're a teacher, you're making like a livable salary. Like our salaries for teachers are pretty good. Like, you know, your starting salary is a little low, obviously, but like you're like fine. If you pass like 5 to 10 years, you're making like good money. Whereas like the States, I'm like, holy shit, like teachers are picking up second jobs. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, it happens. A lot of the things that we do here, people are picking up second jobs because the cost of living is high. the wages are low,
Yeah.
and whenever wage increases happen, it's like it doesn't take account of inflation, and then everything else also. They're like, oh well, you're making an extra $50 a month, so you can afford to spend an extra $100 in expenses for required expenses like
Yeah.
food and shelter and utilities. It's like everything else increases to where you're actually working harder to maintain the lifestyle that you already have, and
Yeah.
it's not. It's like these things are working against you. But yeah, it's like you in a lot of ways you don't, unless you're in like a privileged population of people who are just successful by luck or circumstance. You work a lot of your life struggling to maintain a decent level of living, and it's like a lot of people are below that line, and that's something we need to address. But like with education in particular, like we know historically, empirically, that the more resources are put into education, the better it is for society as a whole. We get a
Yeah.
higher graduation rate across the board from K through 12 to into college. We get more innovation, more advances in technology because all these creative minds who may have been lost to whatever their socioeconomic circumstances suddenly now have access to these resources that were able to facilitate the leading light who found the cure to X, Y, or Z, who
Yeah.
found a way for higher energy efficiency, who found a new artistic style that inspired people to come to these new conclusions and advancements in our life and society. And it's like, well, no, it's actually better to have an ignorant masses who are just, able to be told and listen,
Oh yeah.
told what to do and listen without question. It's like, but that's actually, more stagnant. It's bad. It's not good. But, it's like, we need to be able to examine these things closely because it does all start like with learning. I mean, even as a child, like your parents are educators or your first educators that you receive. They
Yeah.
teach you what it is. Like they tell you you're not a dog or a cat because as kids, you're like they'll come and do like meow or bark at you, and they're like I'm a dog or you're like actually you're not. It's you're doing your best impression of an animal, but you're a different type of animal and you're a human animal. So
Mathematics
let's
today. Are you
teach you what it
practicing?
is to be this.
Hi, Dodo. Dodo's one of my regular watchers. Mathematics today. Are you practicing to be a politic or something? Oh God, no. Just only on Twitch. Politics on Twitch. That's where it stops for me.
Which politician? I love it.
Oh God. Twitch politician. There you go. Oh Lord.
Um,
I want to work on like policy when I'm older. That's why I'm going into criminology. I would love to work on criminal policy, but holy shit, government, like getting into government, I would like I'm an anarchist, okay? It's hypocritical for me to become a politician. But yeah, sorry, continue you were saying I cut you off there a little bit.
no, but it's like those are important tenets that, for the sake of control and for easy governance, we neglect, and people are like, oh, like as long as they get through high school, it's good enough, and just need to have that piece of paper in your hand. It was like, what did you gain along the way? Like we're not examining that closely enough, and we're not, and in the States at least, we're not making it very encouraging. A lot of people, unfortunately, like I've valued my educators growing up, and thankfully I've had the ability to have people who have taught me well. And I went to I've been publicly educated my entire life.
Yeah.
So that could have went one extreme or the other. Thankfully, I was in a good neighborhood where the education was very well supplied by the taxes of the property, blah blah blah. But I was able to learn and have teachers who facilitated my ability to learn and to think abstractly and to question, and I appreciate that. But they don't make it something that is conducive to people unless you have a passion to be like, I want to be a teacher and I want to teach, and this is what I want to do. They don't incentivize, right? They don't be like, oh well, if you teach Russ, we'll pay for your master's or your PhD. And like,
Yeah.
if I had the ability to send my children, if I had them to a public institution where they facilitated their educators to become PhDs, and suddenly now I have like PhDs teaching my kids with advanced concepts and theories and being able to relate it in a way that kids understand. Like, this is a good thing. Like they're
Yeah.
getting something awesome out of this, and they're being paid well for it. But like they're like, like this is what people fall back on. Like they fall back on being educators if what they wanted to do doesn't work out, and that's unfortunate. Like it should never be
Yeah.
something that you just fall back on. It should be something that you should be able to do because there are incentives that make it possible for you to do so, and also encourage you to be like, actually, I want to do this, not like I have to do this.
It's super sad to me that like because I think again like here in Canada it's a little bit better for teachers because there is like I had a really good experience through elementary and high school like all the way, and I know a lot of people who had that here, but I think it's because our teachers are paid well. There's a lot of incentive to be a good teacher, and people who like go into teaching, it's like there's a like we have a decent level of education required. Like you have to do like your 4 year undergrad, and then you have to do 2 years of PDP and all that type of stuff. So like there's a bit of like a I don't know what it's like in the States, but here like it does take like quite a bit of time to become a teacher. But like we also like reward our teachers for like being good teachers, and like you do make a good amount of money, so I think it incentivizes people to be better teachers because like you don't have to pick up that second job. You can dedicate that extra time. Like my mom works a lot in her off time of like doing lesson planning and making sure like she would always like be working like overtime. Like my mom sometimes would be staying up like super late to like work on things for school and like work on things for work. But a lot of teachers are just really dedicated because they have that extra time to be dedicated. Whereas like in the States right now, it doesn't feel like the these circumstances are set up that teachers are going to want to be the best that they can be, and they sometimes don't even have the option. Again, if like you're a teacher who's being paid so shit that you have to pick up a second job, well, now you have no incentive to do that first job really well because you're like, well, shit, I'm working 2 jobs. Like, what's the point?
Exactly, exactly, and that's one of the differences. And this is another reason why I like having discussions with people from around the world, and if it's just our neighbors to the north or the south, and from an American standpoint, is
Yeah.
that even with proximity, where like the borders that separate us are barely anything, we have starkly different ways of life when it
Yeah.
comes to our governance, and like we may share values and things in common, but it's like the way that we live and how we live and what's available to us is different. And I am ignorant of those things unless I like I can like look at a like read a book or an article and like see that these things are different. But speaking to people who have those experiences help open my mind more. So that's why like I don't want to be in an echo chamber. I don't want to just be speaking to people who have shared my experience and be like, you know what? Yeah, we agree on the same thing. That's we're done. Awesome.
Yeah.
We both agree on the same thing. Perfect. We're both right. We can walk away. Conversation's done in 2 minutes. Let's go drink and party.
Yeah.
Like I don't want that. I want to question. I want to be able to understand and to acknowledge that I'm incorrect and mistaken in some ways that I think and what my views are, and also like learn from those mistakes as we do. We learn from mistakes, hopefully. But like I can only get that from people who have other points of view, and I think that's important. But some people, they're out there like I don't want to talk to anybody who has a different point of view. They're just
Yeah.
wrong, and I don't want to talk to them and just keep them away from me. But that's not my approach.
Yeah, I think that's like I mean it really goes back to like why I set up this channel in the first place is I was so I think especially being like online and stuff like I'm decently young that like I'm online quite a bit and it being in like the politics spaces on Twitch, being on Twitter, you see so many people who like do not want to listen to any other points of view and don't want to have conversations. I think I really wanted a space where I felt safe, like not just for me, but for other people to like even for you. I wanted to meet other people who wanted to have these conversations in like a deep and meaningful, impactful way, and not just like echo each other's ideas constantly for eternity, right? Like I wanted that, like I like that critical engagement, and I love doing that, like just for the sake of doing it. And maybe my family like taught me like that, like my whole family, not just my parents and like my brother, like not just my small family, but like my extended family. Whenever we have big get-togethers, it's always very political. Everyone loves to debate. Everyone loves to have like deep, hard conversations, and everyone's fine after. Like everyone's like super happy, but we all just enjoy doing it. And I got so much of that love for that like deep, in-depth, like questioning level conversation and like questioning ideas and like pushing the limits and stuff. I had so much of that growing up, and I love to do it, but I feel like online, it's so hard to do that sometimes because people will get really angry at you for doing it, whether you're on the right or left. Like if you start to question the narratives, like the general like ideologies of your side, people get really angry, and I hate that. And I'm like, I want a space where people can come on, and hopefully if my channel grows, like I'll have more people come on who like disagree with me more, and like we can have that space to like openly talk and like have really good discussions about like, you know, what's good and what's bad, and what's like, you know, what should we be doing in politics, and what should be what policies should be passed, and all these different issues, and like, you know, how much progress is too much and how much progress is good. So I really like that, like those hard conversations. um,
Yeah, as do I. I enjoy engaging a bit of controversy because controversy is indicative that we have a disagreement, and
yeah.
that there are things that we don't understand about each other, and maybe we don't understand about ourselves, that we need to get to the heart of. Like there are things in my life where I thought that like I was the authority on something, especially in my youth and inexperience. Like I'm 38. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm a little bit more seasoned than
Yeah.
than a lot of the people that I watch stream, that I engage with. But I've made the folly in my youth to be like, oh, I'm the authority. I know I'm smart. I know this well, and anybody who disagrees with me is wrong. But that wasn't, you know, the correct approach. And I learned through humility and learning to be a better person. Like that took a lot of hard work. I wasn't always the best person. It's something that takes practice. Virtue takes practice and repetition of it over and over again, for it to really come into light for some individuals like myself. I've had to learn to be a better person, and thought falsely that I was just, you know, I was a good person because I did good things, and that's what good people do, and never really examined it. But still, like, to come to understand, like, I'm wrong about things, but that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, but it
Oh
just
yeah.
means that I'm mistaken, and I can learn, and I can only learn by engaging with other people who have different views, who are more informed on the subject. Not, they can be experts, they can be amateurs, but just like that diversity of knowledge, and not going into a conversation thinking I know more than you, but instead switching that mode of thought of I know more than you to what can you teach me about what I don't know about this and what I don't know about myself. And hopefully, even if I come away with the same viewpoint, I've learned something
Yeah.
novel, and I can take something important away from it where I can re-examine where I've come from.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's like so much to do with like that mindset of like personal growth. It's like you're like, even if I don't change my mind, I've learned something. And I think that's like anytime you've learned something, that's growth and that's improvement. And I think that's so important all the time, to be able to recognize that and be able to like want to do that. And like no matter like, you know, you might disagree with a person, you might not come away changing your mind, but like wanting to just hear other points of view, I think at like a fundamental basis is, I think, is a good thing. And it's also, it's encouraging to me when I hear someone who's like much older than, well, yeah, I don't want to call you old by any means, but like who's older than me, who's like you said, a little more well seasoned in life. And I feel like hearing you say these things, and I'm like, it's reinforcing. Like I've believed these things for a while, but I'm like, when I hear someone that much older who's had that much more life experience back it up, I'm like, okay, so maybe I am on the right track here.
Yeah, and I think that's the correct path that a lot of us should take. Like I can't write a prescription that's like, these are the steps that you need to take to live a healthy and fulfilling life, and this is what's going to make you the happiest. Because that's, again, you know, I don't know everything. I will never know everything. I'm human, and I have to be careful. Like, I'm still like kind of a creature of pride, and when I do something right, I enjoy it. When I learn something and I become like adept at that knowledge, I'm proud of it. But I can't ever, like, when I was young, I thought I knew everything, but I also have to constantly remind myself that as I get older, even with the lessons and experience that I have, I can't, like, to you be like, oh, because I'm older than you, like, I know better. Like, that's the wrong form. That's an incorrect reasoning, because
Yeah.
it's just saying because, like, anybody older than you, because they're older, knows more. And that's like, we're back
Yeah.
to circular reasoning. I have to constantly remind myself,
Yeah.
like, with what you say, examine yourself for logical fallacies. It's not that they're wrong or you're wrong. It's just that the process of reasoning has a logical contradiction in it that needs to be addressed. So how can you make your argument stronger? And it might not ever be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but how do you make it better? And maybe you might need to throw it out and change it entirely. But I never want to be at a point, even if I'm lucky enough to be in my 80s or my 90s or whatever, be a point of like, nah, you're just a young whippersnapper. I know everything. Whatever you have to share
Yeah.
with me about your life means nothing because I know everything. But
Yeah.
then I'll never like, at that point I've said I've stopped growing.
Yeah.
Like what, and also like if I know everything, what's the point of it? Like I mean that's philosophical nihilism, right? Like what
Yeah.
is the point of anything? But if I got to the point to where like I knew everything, then it's like the next question is like, well, what's it for?
What's it?
Like if I know
Yeah.
everything, yeah, like why am I even here? And did it like now I'm like questioning me and like I know everything. Like do I just cash out? And it's like clearly I don't, but it's bringing about the wrong questions. And I never want to be at the point to where I'm no longer having that mental elasticity. I think that we are elastic for the entirety of our lives, and even like with mental degeneration and things that happen as you get older, which unfortunately and sadly occurs. Like there are ways that we can continue to learn and improve ourselves, excluding extreme circumstances like with brain death and like with things that actually kill off
Yeah, of
parts of the
course.
brain.
But never stop brainy.
But yeah, I think it's important that we recognize that just because we learn something and we become good at it and we've done it for a long time and we get older, that doesn't mean that we can't continue to learn from others, even those who are older or younger from us. Like
For sure.
it's something that takes a lot of practice, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I never appeal to like some type of authority of like just being older, but I think it is important to like I think when you're young, it's really easy to get into this mindset of like and I remember talking to my dad about this once cuz he's like you're young, you're going to be idealistic, so you think you have all the answers. But what is chatting metaethics? We're talking about metaethics, ethics of what is what should be ethics. Um, but yeah, no, I was talking to my dad about this one time, and he's like, we were talking about some political issue or something or another, and he's like, you're young, you're idealistic, and he's like, you'll come to like learn that as you get older. And I thought, at the time, I was like, no, you're just like, you're too set in your ways, you're old. Like in my head, obviously, I'm like sitting there like, no, you're just too old, you're set in your ways, you're too conservative. And this was when I was like in high school, so I was like super, super left wing. And as I got older, I learned like so much that what he said was true. Is like you learn so much by getting older that things are much more nuanced than you think. And so I think like not necessarily like taking everything that someone older than you says with like as like authority, but like listening to people who are older than you and like using them to challenge your beliefs because they might have some experience in life that you haven't yet, because just by virtue of age you've gone through more typically. I think it's like really important to take that into account. And so like yeah, like you and me have like a decent age gap, but like I would still like I would still expect you obviously to listen to me when we're having a conversation. But I think it is also like I looked at that as like, oh, okay, so I see him like saying similar things like 20 years like ahead, and it's like that's not like that's something in my head that I'm like, okay, that's interesting because it's like this person's got very different life experiences and is a different place in life, but they view this in a similar way. So maybe I'm starting to like get those life experiences that start to bring me into my like some type of grounding in life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I've shaped myself as an individual, not just based off of the people around me. Like they've had a profound influence, like the adults in my life, my peers, professionals, educators, all of those folks. But then I also look to the past, right? Like there's all of the long since past thinkers and educators who have given us works of philosophy, mathematics, art, poetry, like everything that I've taken, have been inspired by and wanted to learn more about them. That's directed a line of inquiry, and that I've been fortunate enough in my life to never have someone around me be like, stop inquiring, like not like going too deep into like conspiracies or something, like accessing government files, yada yada, that would be illegal and dangerous. But like being able to have a curiosity, to have it and to be able to embrace it and to have that curiosity encouraged and nurtured. Like it's not bad to question. It's just how you question is what you have to examine, and the things that you're examining, right? It's like there's a sense of wonder. We wouldn't know under we would I won't say that we know about things, because I don't think we can ever truly know things, especially from a meta sense, like when we get down to essences. But we can have a deeper understanding about our what's before us, about each other, and about the world that we're in. But through constant observation and inquiry, and that's something that we need to continue to facilitate with each other. Not be like trapped in a mindset where it's like those social media echo chambers, like, oh, I'm right, they agree with me, so their agreement means that I'm right, and that's all there is to the
Yeah.
matter. Like, there's always going to be more beyond what we see.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because like again, like being from, like you said, you were like a pretty religious, like, family upbringing. Like, did you ever feel like, maybe not stifled, but did you feel like there was things that you couldn't question, or was your family pretty open about like having different like religious beliefs when you were growing up, like, and like letting you like kind of explore that on your own?
Well, yes and no. So on my mother's side, pretty firm in like what the written word is basically what needs to be abided by. But there was never like I had an interest in video games, in Japanese culture in particular, like a lot of kids do, as they play. Like, I'm from an 80s child, clearly, so like my video game system was Nintendo, which is Japanese, which exposed me to a lot of Japanese things, and developed and gave me an appreciation for it. And also, like,
Oh my god, we're gonna
my
have to talk
first
anime and stuff one day.
yeah, well, I grew up, like, my first anime was Speed Racer that I would watch
Oh
with my
yeah,
dad.
my dad watched
um
that too.
yeah, Sailor Moon would come on at like, because the way that they encouraged kids to get up early for school was that they would put Sailor Moon and Ninja Turtles on at like 6 in the morning, and then
Oh
you would
nice.
start getting up and getting ready for school at 7. So it's like, if you wanted to watch these like really cool cartoons, you would get up early, watch them, eat your cereal, get ready for school, and then you're out. And that was like my early exposure to Japanese animation. And then my first and second grade teachers were also Japanese Americans, so they gave me like this kind of insight into their culture and into their life, that they inherited in my hometown as a pretty prominent population of Japanese people. It's like, oh, like I've had this kind of Eastern bent to me. I'd read Eastern philosophy as I got older, really embraced it, really enjoyed it. As a lot of people do, like, you're a weeb. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. I understand. It's you can mark me as that if you so desire. I won't deny it.
Hey man,
But I
my
respect
Death
it,
Note
and
book collection right there.
yeah, yeah.
Don't
But
worry about it.
it's had a profound experience on the way that I think, and it was one of my first exposures to a world outside of my own, and I appreciate that for opening my mindscape, and showing me that there are different ways of life, and there are other people out there who live differently but still live, and do so successfully, and with longevity. And that was important. And and getting back to the religion thing, is that, like, yeah, there was a little bit of stiflement, but coming from a split background, I got exposure to the Protestant and Lutheran side, or the Protestant Catholic sides of the Christian faith. And then also, like, as I got older and into philosophy, I discovered the works of Thomas Aquinas, of Saint Augustine, and I was like, these deeply religious figures are also deeply philosophical. I'm like, they
Oh, for sure.
embraced the
Yeah.
inquiry, but they found a way to match it with God's design, and thinking like that is like, so you can still be philosophical and also religious at the same time, even though I became irreligious but still spiritual, because I
Yeah.
believe that, like, there's something out there greater than us, and whether it's a being or whether it's a
Oh yeah.
concept, it's there.
I completely agree with that. I could tell you this might have to be a separate stream one day. But I don't know how much, if you're down to do this again. But like, I had crazy like paranormal stories growing up, like paranormal like interactions when I was growing up, like just insanely wild things you would not believe. But so I'm with you where I'm like pretty a-religious, but definitely spiritual to an extent.
Yeah, and those are things like, well, it's like they don't necessarily, these things don't have to be in conflict with each other, because, like, that's one of the things that they teach you about. Like, that's one of the first things that is taught to you religiously, is like, we cannot, like, we can know of God, but we can't know God's designs. And So there's a whole realm of inquiry. It's like, so if we understand more about the world and we discover the science and the reason behind it, we can become closer to God by that inquiry. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
this is a lesson that I can take away. I'm not a religious person anymore, but these religious figures taught me something important that I carry within the core of my being as part of why I think and how I think, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm not ever gonna be like, oh, religion is wrong, it's bad, blah blah blah, or it's cultish, or anything of these things that people tend to throw. And I'm like, these figures have taught me very important things that I embrace,
Mm-hmm.
and that they exist has helped me grow as a human being. And I still don't know. Like
Mm-hmm.
I will never know what's beyond this. And if I have like a deeply religious experience or spiritual encounter or whatever, like those things may be yet to happen. But there's my part of my the part of my mind is like there's something like you're just insignificant in this whole skew of things, and
Mm-hmm.
there's something much greater beyond you out there, and you really need to like look out there and be like, what is it and how do I learn more about it?
Yeah. How do I? Yeah. I think, as cliche as it might sound, I think everyone to like in this world, whether it be God or something else, I think we all have to like we all end up latching on, or we all should latch on to something that's bigger than ourselves and just ourselves in this world. I think that's something I like. For me, I definitely like maybe being like religious. You found that like a little bit easier coming to that because you had like a basis. For me, I think there was a big point in my life where I think especially when I was like super depressed at points, I went through these pockets of like feeling like I wasn't attached to anything, and I'm like, it's just me. Like I'm a speck in a very vast universe, and nothing really matters. And I think that's like a super detrimental to like one's mental health when you start to think like that. And it's like it's not that it's unrealistic, but I think it can really fuck with your head when you start to like think like that, and like you think about the insignificantness of your own life. And I think like latching onto something greater than yourself is like super important to keep your like, and it's crazy because you would think it's counterintuitive to like latch onto something like kind of like out here to like keep yourself grounded, but I think that's like how a lot of us keep ourselves grounded is you have to latch onto something bigger and something that's like maybe not so concrete and not so like physical and like right in front of you. Like my existence is here, right? Like my physical body is like very concrete. I can latch onto that. But I don't know if it's necessarily always the best thing to latch onto. I think you have to find something bigger than yourself and something that's not necessarily as concrete to latch onto.
Yeah, and I, that's a lot of I think that's how our ancestors kind of came up with their legends and their mythos and the gods is that
Oh yeah.
it's like that we are in a very advantageous position now where we think very clearly
I'm always jealous of people
from a
actually.
human standpoint. But I think back to the infancy of our ancestors is like when the world was super new, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like what did they see? How did they interpret it? And that's how some of these things probably came to light is because there was no understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's just like they're new. Language isn't really a basis of anything, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to figure out what the hell. It's like there was a point to where it's like we went from a mentality of like lesser apes and other mammals to like really complex abstract
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and we're just like all of a sudden the world became like a waking dream, and there
Suddenly
was
you're like, how the
probably
fuck do I explain the lightning? Like there
yeah.
is no conceptual understanding like what back then of like lightning hits and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and I mean, we're even in the privileged position to where like we pretty much understand that when we wake up, we were in a dream. But I would hazard the guess that our early ancestors, when they woke from a dream, probably really didn't understand what was real and
Mm.
what was happening. Like this, it was probably just one big continuation. Is like those things that happened in the dream were just the same reality
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't really have the ability to like separate from each other. Like all of those things were just one uh, conducive story of life, and then every creature and being that they met in their dreams was no different from anything that they met in reality, which is what I suppose could be true. But to get back to the idea of religion, is like you mentioned that your family is Sikh, and I took like the only one of the things that I took away from that is I took in my college days a course in religion
Mm-hmm.
because I was really curious about the different religions of the world, and that's one thing that you can get in college that's not as well explained anywhere else
Mm-hmm.
in life. And a lot of people went in there with their ideas of faith, whatever they believed in. They'd be like, I'm going in here to prove that my idea is right.
Mm-hmm.
And that, but it was never about that. And one of the things that they touched down on was Sikhism. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about that faith is that as they had their gurus over time, they eventually got to the point to where the gurus ceased to be living people,
Mm-hmm.
and then the guru became the word. I was
Yeah.
like, how profound is that?
Right?
That
It's
that the
crazy.
guru became the word. That's so abstract,
Yeah.
but also enduring because they it's like in a sense you see that humanity, like the human gurus are mortal,
Mm-hmm.
that they pass on from this mortal coil. And I don't know the belief of like if they carry on and live in divinity or anything because I'm not experienced with the faith, but the one thing I took away is that they found that the word endures and the word is what teaches.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's amazing. And that was like one of the many profound realizations I had by taking that class. I was like, it's not necessarily that anyone is believing anything wrong, but there are amazing things that people have realized through their ways of life and belief. I was like, have changed me. I was like, wow, maybe I really don't know everything. And I was like, thank you. I'm like, thank you for showing me this. Even if we don't share the same belief, you have given me an incredible discovery that has given me new insight into life, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful.
I think, yeah, like kind of building on that, it's what I love about Sikhism and like Buddhism actually is very similar. It's this idea of the people that are worshipped, because Buddha and like the gurus aren't really worshipped in our religions, but they're looked up to. Shout out to the gurus. But it's this idea of like these people weren't anything, like they were people, but it was their intense drive for knowledge and finding that greater something, greater peace, like something. It's like greater thing to attach onto, and these people like went out on a journey to find that, and that's what brought them so much like brought them their peace, and that's what made the religions. It's like it wasn't a god that came down and talked to people, but it was people who went out and looked for something greater and brought it back to the people. And Sikhism and Buddhism are both like that, where it was like it was a person who went out looking for something greater and found something greater and brought it back to the people and said like, if you like, I like that idea that if you look for something you can find something. Like, there might be something greater out there, and it's not necessarily all encompassing, but like, we have to look and search for these good things, and it might not just come to you, but you have to work at it. And I think I like that idea of like those type of religions, like, because I'm not a huge fan of like religion in general, but I have less issue with like non-deistic and religions like that aren't super strict in their beliefs and thinking.
Yeah, and I agree with that. That's part of the reason why I became more spiritual and less religious is because there's a lot of like doctrine and tradition and ritual that it's like if you do these things, then you will be in this like in God's favor, what however God is represented in that faith. And
Mm-hmm.
there are usually like certain rules and edicts that you have to follow in order for you to like proceed on to be in God's grace in the afterlife, yada yada. And that's not that's just a generalist prescription. Not all religions believe in an afterlife.
Yeah.
Not all religions have those tenets. We can acknowledge that as a basic fact. But there's kind of like a general understanding that major world religions, like God has rules that you follow, and if you follow these rules, then you'll be in God's favor, and that's a good thing for you. So follow these rules. But they're very constricting, and I don't like to be constricted, and
Mm-hmm.
that's another reason why I would question. It's like, well, if God exists universally, is God necessarily going to constrict me, or would God be like, if you live your life in reverence and love of me, and still are a good person, then why would God be mad at me if I dedicated my life to such a being, but in a different way than is prescribed, and not
Yeah.
like making human sacrifice or whatever like that, but just like being like, I live each day of my life loving people as God would love people,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what I believe is right and good. But I've came to this realization after really examining my life as it was before, and that's not like, I found that the rules were just not in line. They went against the grain, and not that I wasn't taught valuable lessons about ethics and morality and what good and
Mm-hmm.
evil and what it is to be a good person, but like I had to really examine those. And it wasn't an easy decision to be like, I'm going to walk away from the religion of faith, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going to be a person of spirituality, and I'm going to acknowledge that there's a divineness in
Mm-hmm.
humanity. Like there's no person can be God, but there's a divine spark in all of us that we share. There's some sort of light
Yeah.
that's there that I acknowledge in other people, and I want them to illuminate the darkness in my mind with their words and their thoughts, because
Mm-hmm.
my mind is vast as is everyone else's, and there's a lot of room to fill a lot of darkness that needs to be illuminated, and the only way we
Mm-hmm.
can do is like with discussions like this and by inquiry and by discovery. Like that's what it is. It's discovery. It's like we're inquisitive, we're curious, and I want to discover more. And I'm not going to discover everything in my lifetime, but hopefully I can leave something behind where other people can continue to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. It's nice. What I hope by the end of my life is that like I feel like I have spent all of my life learning and like that I never stopped learning, and I think that's why I love these conversations is because like we agree on a lot of things, and but like this conversation nonetheless has like makes me feel like I'm learning and I'm like engaging, and I love that aspect, and I just hope by the time I like get to that age where I'm at the end of my life and I like can look back and be like, you know what, I always I kept going. I always wanted to keep learning. I always wanted to keep like expanding my mind and learning new things. And it's even shout out to Sikhism for this. I love the idea, and like this is why I don't love like the really strict religions, because Sikhism I always learned growing up. It's like it literally says in our holy book that like you know even if you don't believe in this God, if you don't believe in me, that's okay as long as you live your life in the best way possible and you're good to people. You will find like you will find peace. And I love that message of like it doesn't necessarily need to be my way to do things, but it needs to be a good way to do things. Right? You have to be good to the people around you and you will find that peace, whether it's like in the afterlife or whatever. Because I don't know exactly what Sikhism's tenets are for like afterlife and like all that type of stuff. Um, there's not really a strict idea of like that in Sikhism either. I don't believe, and so maybe that's what makes it like a little bit nicer too. Is like there's nothing that like is scaring you into like following or being a good person, but rather it's just telling you, to find peace, you should, you know, just live a good life. And I kind of like that.
Yeah. And that's one thing when I look at when I see like all of the world religions that I am aware of is that like, and that comes back to my whole like question of like, well, if God is supposed to exist universally for everybody, why is everything so conscripted and prescripted as to like these are very set rules, and what you said touches down on everything. Like, well, if God exists, that's not that any one of these world religions is better than the other. I think the perversion and the constriction of these faiths comes from our folly as humanity is trying to become God ourselves and control people and make them think that this is the way that life should be because we are the vessels of the message of God, and therefore what we say is the authority, and it gets perverted over time. But I think that if God exists, God came to all of the diverse peoples over time and spoke to them in different ways in which they could understand a very complex and abstract concept
Mm-hmm.
of a creator, and gave them messages that said, like, this is the way of how to live, and to have a way, like, if it's not through me, then these are the general things that would lead to a good life, and please, like, be a good person,
Mm-hmm.
to paraphrase. And I think, like, yeah, like, if God exists, then certainly there's all these different messages, because we all, like, with going back to learning, we all don't learn the same.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get the message in a way that we can understand, in a language we can relate to. And
Mm-hmm.
if God exists universally, then certainly there's a whole diaspora and plethora and pantheon of ways that faith was introduced. Because if I was a creator being and everything's diverse and everything's unique, then of course I'm going to have to speak to them in ways that they will understand, because I have that ability. I can,
Mm-hmm.
as an omnipresent, omnipotent, all-knowing, all-seeing being, I have that ability. And how dare we as humanity think that God does not have that ability to talk to us in different
Exactly.
languages, in different ways, to convey messages in ways that we can understand because we are imperfect and insignificant, but they, as the all-encompassing,
Yeah.
certainly have that ability. And how dare we ever say that it's not possible? Because
Because if
that's
God,
us saying that we know better than God, and we can never
yeah.
know better.
Because if God was this omnipotent being, He would be able to see into our minds and understand how we would be able to, you know, take in this information. And if He doesn't have that ability, then He's not the omnipotent God that we think He is, right?
Yeah. And therefore not God because not
Yeah,
omnipotent.
exactly. Yeah. All of a sudden, you end up in a nice little paradox. It's like,
Yeah.
have you ever heard the like line, "If God is all good, He can't be all powerful, and if He's all powerful, He can't be out good," right?
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
like, well, there's so many paradoxes. That's like the philosophical line of reasoning as to if God, like, if God is all powerful, like, can God create a rock that even God can't lift? Like, there are these things like, well, like if God can't lift it, then God's not all powerful. So now we have like God can't exist. But it's like these, it's our very limited line of philosophical reasoning. But we have the ability to reason, so we have the ability to question and be like, okay, so what does it mean? Like we can never really understand what it means to be omnipotent and omnipresent and all-knowing and all of these things, but at least we can question it and hopefully come to a better understanding of these unsolvable riddles that our ancestors were beset with and that we carry on to this day.
What good means in metaethics. Yeah, exactly. Like that's well, yeah, there is no definition of good. That's the thing, right? Like you can't define what good is. You have to like assume from like how people respond. I think the only thing we can I know this is a big debate in philosophy. Usually what I would assume good is like how does it interact with the world and society around you, and does it have good outcomes for the people around you and for like the world around you? Like does what you're doing.
And it's like I always have this bent towards Greek philosophy because that was my primary influence, and that's what I have the greatest understanding of in my limited capacity. But like that's Aristotle's question, right? Is that like all things in existence exist in pursuit of the good? The good is the thing that it is valuable in and of itself. It is not a means to an end. It is always the end. So everything in life is in pursuit of that good. If a knife is made, its excellence is in how that knife cuts, and that excellence is in pursuit of the good. It exists for the good, which is like the overarching concept of everything. This is a horrible paraphrasing of Aristotle's work, by the way, but it's like,
It's okay. You've been
but
out of
then you
unit
get to the
for
question like,
a little while.
yeah, if you're in pursuit of the good, then what is the good? And that's, I feel like I could be mistaken in this, but that was like what his educator, Plato, and Plato's educator, Socrates, were trying to get at. Like, well, there's this idea of the good, and that the good is either a means to an end or an end in itself, but what is the good? And then they start talking about it. And then we never, throughout those thousands of years, like, we
There's
still
no
don't know.
answer. There's still no answer. And again, it's like
Yes.
it's that idea. It's an unanswerable question because I think good is also so relative. Like what is good today may have not been good 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago, right? Like that the idea of good is so subjective. And maybe like if you ask a religious person it might not be. For them like the good is always whatever, you know, God intends is what the good is. But I think if you don't take in religion, it's really hard. Or if you don't have some like, you know, basis of what the good is, it's really hard to like understand like what is the good, and especially what is the good at any certain point in time. Because again, like even from day-to-day life, like what is good in one situation is not necessarily good in all situations, right?
Yeah, and here's even a modern example too. It's like, so for the ancient thinkers, the good was the highest value. But let's put it in terms of you doing a work. So let's say that you write an essay, and the same you get the same marks on it. Let's not give it a perfect, but you give it a 95. But
Yeah.
your professor writes on in one of those realities good, and in the other reality, they write excellent. Which is the better to you? Do you want to have the 95 that's good, or do you want to have the 95 that's excellent, because there's different value placed on doing something good, which should be the highest value because that's what you're working for, or being an excellent individual. But the excellence is just like the highest thing in pursuit of the good. Like the ancient thinkers would be clearly you want the one that says good. Clearly that's the one you want. But we have a value. It's like good isn't good enough. You want to be more than good, which is excellent, which is can't, like, from that philosophical reasoning, like, excellence can't be better than good, because excellence is only ever, like, if you're excellent, that means that you are actually, like, in line with what is good in the world. And that, like, if they put good, you are at the highest excellence. But we have a different value assigned to it. Like, we assign values to things like, it says good. That's not good enough.
It's not good enough. Yeah, Iron Lariat says, "Oh, it's going to be a subjective forever. Then it sounds intellectually unsatisfying, and it is. It's super unsatisfying to say that. However, there is no other answer. That, like, unfortunately, it's always going to be such a subjective thing that it's never, you're never going to get a satisfying answer on that. Again, like, I think the only people who believe they can give a satisfying answer are probably religious people." Which I think why like when it comes to ethics and stuff, it's so interesting to have like conversations between religious and non-religious people, because I think that's like the biggest divide among ethics. I don't know if there's a bigger divide among ethics than those two groups, because one group says there is and one group says there isn't. Like with morals, one group says there's an objective moral and good and ethic, and the other says that you can never know that.
Yeah. And then there's, it's like when it comes to objective morality, and one of my favorite philosophers for an argument for an objective morality is Immanuel Kant, is that some people say you can't have morality without God. And I think that there is a religious influence for our understanding of morality, but I am of the belief that there is an objective morality. Again, it's a higher value that exists outside of us, and we're constantly trying to figure it out. It's not something that's necessarily from utility, but it's something more profound and something that we're still grappling with, but also with the idea of the good being something that's subjective forever. I am of the mindset that it is by necessity has to be subjective forever, because let's say we get to the point to where we figure it out, we've done it, we've got the answer, and that's the final answer. We've discovered everything else in pursuit of the good, and now we know what the good is. What do we do? What do we do now that we've found out everything? Where do we just, like, what motivation is there? Now that we have resolved everything in life, what left is there except for just to exist until you end?
It kind of brings you back to that conversation you were saying earlier where, like, you're like, if I learned everything there ever was to learn, then, like, what's the next step? What do we do next, right? It's like the same idea of, like, if you learn what is good, what do you do next? And I think also it's like, if we decide what is the good, if we figure out what is the good, well, what happens when 50 years passes? Is it still the good?
Yeah.
Is it all, like, when we find the good, is the good what is good right now? Or is the good all encompassing forever until eternity? I mean, that would be like the next question.
Yeah.
But
we won't be answering those questions, because we'll have just been in stagnation. In my opinion, we'll just be floating through space, wasting away, because we figured out everything, and it's not a question for us to pose anymore, because we're like, yep,
well,
we've answered all the questions.
If
right?
we have the good, and in theory, if we had the good, we would abide by it, right? And all of a sudden now, like, life becomes seamless, right? Because all of a sudden you have the answer to everything. Like, what do I do in this situation? Well, look to the good. And it almost becomes the religion, right? Like, if you have the good, you look to the good for the answer, and all of a sudden nothing becomes hard in life anymore, because everything has an answer. Everything has the right answer.
There's no more curiosity. There's no more guesswork. What kind of life is that to live if you know everything? It's like, basically, it's like, if I do this, then that. If I do that, then this. Like, you already just know every outcome immediately from those steps. And it's just like, well, I may as well just sit in my chair and do nothing, because no matter what happens, it already has a prescribed end that I can see.
Do you think this is why always, like, they say the smartest people are the saddest? Like, people with, like, who are really intelligent are always more depressed?
It does happen.
right?
Too much knowledge can be a burden. I
It
mean,
can.
it happens as you grow older, right? It's like as you're a kid, it's all about awe and wonder. Everything's new. It's a
Yeah.
brand new experience. The world is there and it's good and it's a huge fairy tale. We have everything that tells us it's a fairy tale. And we get older and we learn that there's pain and there's suffering and that not everything is going to work out for you. And some people have a harder lot than others, and some people have a shitty life, whether by circumstance or by choice, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So what does it
Hmm.
even mean? And it's like the more you learn about those things, and then people say like ignorance is bliss. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Absolutely.
If you don't know
Because
about the bad, then everything is good.
absolutely. Yeah, it's just like it's just all sunshine and lollipops and every day is just, Disney
Hmm.
because you know no better. But once you start realizing things and you see that there's a facade and that there's a meta reality out there that we perceive in our mind's eye beyond the physical, like those hopes and those dreams, and that there's a perfect life for you, and that there's that one person who exists only for you and no one else, and you exist for them and no one else, and like all these things that we're told, it's like that's not necessarily true. And when you learn these things as like they're fact, uh, by your own, and I'm not saying they are because I don't know. I'm just human. But like people do realize these things on their own and accept it and embrace it. They're like, yeah, my life sucks and I'm depressed, and it's because, this is nothing ever goes right for me, and all of these reasons, and it's just like this is just my experience, and my experience is a negative experience, and what is it even for? And it's because they've learned too much. They've seen too many things in life that have contradicted the reality that they were led to believe is the one that they have. And that's unfortunate, right? It's just words
Mm.
and thoughts, and then it affects the way that you live.
Yeah.
And this is like by other people that you interact with too. And it's it goes back to the notion like words are power. Like people literally do kill themselves because people get trolled in the internet. That like people come in like they're like just quit life,
Yeah.
and then people are like, you know what, you were the one that
That was
got
the
me at
straw.
this really weak moment, and I'm gonna do it,
Yeah.
and they do it, and that's just all it took was just the words,
Yeah.
just not even an action, a physical action. It was just something intangible, something that was understood and just hit the person at the right moment. It's like, yep, that's the kill switch.
Yeah.
Bye.
And it's crazy, like it can go both ways too, because like you could have a moment like that where like something just absolutely like destroys your reality. But have you ever like been talking to someone and they say something and all of a sudden your entire outlook on life changes and you're like, holy shit, like it's like this most like they say something so offhandedly, like they don't even think about it, but your brain is like stuck on it for like weeks because you cannot get like, you're like, oh my god, this has like changed my life, like this like one sentence somehow has like changed my entire outlook on life. Like I know we've all had those moments, and I couldn't recall it in the moment right now, like what those moments have been, but I know I've had those moments where I've like talked to someone and they've said something and I'm like, oh my god, oh my,
Yeah,
like oh my
absolutely.
god.
Absolutely. And that's the power of words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is like you have, on the one hand, completely negative, detrimental experiences that can end life. And then you have experiences that can have them continue to endure, where they're like, I was in my darkest hour. And the
I've just
words
been
that you
like booted
spoke,
into life.
yeah, these examples happen in real life. Like they meet these figures and they're like, what you said, they're like, I was on the verge of my demise, and whatever you said or you showed me changed my entire outlook, and now I'm in
Mm-hmm.
pursuit of something greater. Like I may not be the most successful or the happiest, but I found some sort of meaning that has
Mm-hmm.
made everything now way more worthwhile than I initially thought. And they're like, thank you. And that's my experience with religion, not religion, but like, well, partially religion. Like that's from my upbringing, but also from my education and from the people around me. Is like there are just these moments, like the moment with the religion class in with the enlightenment from Sikhism. So it's like there was a brief moment of clarity and understanding and enlightenment that just like resounded with me. I was like, this, I've like compartmentalized this moment of my education, and it
Mm-hmm.
has changed who I am as an individual. And it's like at that point I wasn't like in a dark place or anything, and I'm not currently now, thankfully. Like everybody has dark moments.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that's just natural. But like it was a part to where in my life. It wasn't bad, but it made my life better by just getting that little, and like it's happened everywhere in my life through various ways. It's like, but there are parts where it's like there are negative experiences that have sent me on a spiral. I'm just like, I don't want to get out of bed today.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
often just from the power of just someone saying words.
Mhm. Yeah. It's crazy. Um. Well, okay. It is getting late now. Currently. I would love to continue this conversation, but I think we should maybe wrap it up here for tonight. If you are satisfied with that conclusion.
Well, I will never be satisfied with any conclusion.
Fair
So
enough. You know
I
what?
think, but the conversation, yes, I was very pleased with this conversation. And I am definitely open to the idea of having more. With any luck, your audience is also open to hearing these conversations, and maybe we can get some sort of scheduled talk and timeline down, and maybe new subjects. As your availability um, is there. Like I know you're a student, so you have to kind of work with what your life demands.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty flexible, and it seems like you've had people pretty engaged here,
Yeah. People seem to
and
like having you on.
yeah, and they've had some pretty interesting points here. Where Iron Lariat is of the mindset that people may not be able to interpret and apply the objective reality, even if it exists. And yeah, it's possible that there's no perfect good anywhere, but it's also possible that there is, because I believe in infinite possibilities. But again, that's a concept. In being infinite, it's a concept, and immeasurable. So anything can happen, but also nothing can, right? Because also zero it's all concepts. It's all concepts,
It's that it's
and
the
that's what I love
multiverse,
talking
okay?
about.
All these universes exist. Hi, can I see your socks? All right, absolutely not.
God, feet, I love it.
I will set up a PayPal, and if you're willing to pay me, I will do it one day. There you go. That's the
But
deal.
yes, um, I was happy with this conversation. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.
My name is Sin Fatalis. I am a streamer here on Twitch, and I will just like say hi to the chat in text. So if you're interested in what I do, I mostly stream video games, but I had a rare opportunity to speak with oh my God, with Rex here. You can tell I'm talked out here. I had to think
Oh
about
yeah.
it. With Rex, 73 underscore. If you're new to her channel, please drop her a follow. This was a very fun 3.5 hour conversation, and she's definitely worth your time. And yeah, we'll do this again sometime if she's so inclined and you're all inclined
I would love to
to
have you
see
back
more.
on. I love this conversation. Yeah, I would be so down to set up like a scheduled thing. We do it once every week or once every couple of weeks. I'd be super down. Please go check out Sin's channel. He makes great content and I enjoy his streams. So go check him out as well after this. But yeah, I think we're going to end stream here for tonight. So I enjoyed having you guys all here. And I'll probably be streaming again tomorrow. So you guys can come back. Good night.